Members of council are assembled and it is 6:30 when we're ready to begin.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order this planning committee meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and welcome all members of the public who are with us here in the chambers this evening. It's good to see all you guys here and welcome everybody who's watching us by the live stream and also welcome to all members of the committee. It's good to have you all here. All right, so we're on to our second item, which is the land acknowledgement, and we'll turn that over to the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree. It's nice to see people in the council chambers again. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which consists of the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nation. We understand this land holds immense significance to the people of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We appreciate those who live and work alongside us today and who continue to continue the traditions of their ancestors as stewards of the land we are privileged to inhabit. We thank them for the contributions they have made in both caring of the land and the shaping of this community. We commit to truth and reconciliation, to acknowledging the truth about what happened to Indigenous peoples because of colonization and to reconciliation, which begins with each and every one of us. And Mr. Mayor, I just want to say, 2 weeks ago, we met as this council with Saugeen First Nations Council, and for the first time ever, I believe that happened, where the two councils got together, and it was a great opportunity to talk about ways where we can partner together in the future for economic development opportunities, and other things were discussed. But I just wanted to say that there was an enjoyable experience. It was very worthwhile and something that I hope that we will be doing again, meeting with the two councils. So that's a first for our community, and we have a great relationship with Saugeen First Nation, and certainly will continue. As a local government and public organization, we are dedicated to learning about Indigenous culture, to fostering a better relationship with First Nations and their people, and we commit ourselves to actions that move us forward on a path to healing along with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation.
Okay, thank you. So next on the agenda is additions, deletions, or amendments. We don't have any of those. So next is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. We have no minutes to adopt this evening, so we're on to public meetings, and we have 3 public meetings on the agenda this evening. And the first one is 6.1, which is a planning meeting on local official plan amendment L 2023-003 and zoning bylaw amendment Z 2022-093 for 1596666 Ontario Limited, care of Becky Moss, 644 Mill Street in Port Elgin. This is a public meeting under the Planning Act, and the meeting on this file is now open. Purpose of the public meeting is to learn about the application and to hear from members of the public. First, we will receive a report from the planning staff. Then we will hear from the applicant or their agents. Then we will hear from any members of the public. Members of the public are advised that the ability to appeal the decision on this application may be limited if you do not provide comments on the application before the decision is made. Comments may be made verbally before the committee or submitted to staff in writing before the bylaw is passed. After we have heard from the public, the committee will discuss and consider a recommendation on this application. So I'll now ask the planner on the file to present the application.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I am presenting this evening on a local official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment as indicated earlier. The applicant is a numbered Ontario Limited company, care of Becky Moss. Cobide Engineering is the agent on the file, and a representative from Cobide is here this evening as well. And this particular application is at 644 Mill Street. As you can see from the air photo, it is at the corner of Bricker Street and Mill Street. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the application, 1, the local official plan amendment is seeking to increase the permitted density on the site from 90 to 102 units per hectare. The applicant actually is proposing 98 units per hectare, but the 102 is to allow some flexibility in that proposal. The applicant is also seeking a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the site from office residential to residential fourth density special, and that would include special provisions relating to lot area, density, some of the setbacks, as well as open space, parking, and driveways. If approved, the application would facilitate the development of two 12-unit, 3-story apartment buildings. Next slide, please. So we have included a few photos of the site. This is taken from Mill Street, looking towards the current structure. So there is currently an office building on the property, and that is currently being rented. So the proposal would be to include the development of the two apartment buildings. As noted earlier, they would be 3 stories in height. Next slide, please. So we have included an additional photo here. This third photo is taken from the corner of Mill Street and Bricker Street, looking towards the property. Next slide, please. And this is taken from the municipal parking lot to the south, looking towards the property and specifically at the vegetation between this property and the property to the east, which is a single family detached. All other property boundaries to this are bordered by municipal streets, so Bricker Street, Mill Street, and a municipal lane on the south side. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed site plan. As you can see, there are 2 buildings proposed with parking. Parking would be accessed from the municipal lane on the south side of the site. There would be some direct parking access directly from the lane, and then the rest of the parking is proposed in the center of the site through angled parking. There are 30 parking spots proposed, which does meet the zoning bylaw requirements for apartment dwellings. The exit from the parking area would be towards Mill Street. So we did circulate this application to various agencies and departments, and we received comments back from the town, Enbridge Gas, the Bruce Grey Catholic District School Board, the historic Saugeen Métis, and the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. There were no substantive concerns identified from those agencies. And then we also did circulate to members of the public. The circulation radius for this particular application is 120 meters from the project site. We did receive 3 public comments in writing at the time the agenda was published for this meeting. We have subsequently received an additional 4 comments in writing, which I understand were shared with council prior to the meeting. Some of those applicants also did have presentations, which were also forwarded to council. And I understand that there are members of the public who are looking to speak this evening to this application. All of the members of the public who did provide comments did express concerns and objections to the proposal. Next slide, please. So just to recap, this is a local official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment. The applications would facilitate the 2 12-unit apartment buildings. County staff are recommending approval of the application, subject to comments arising from tonight's meeting. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So now we will open the public portion of the meeting. We'll start with the applicant or their agent. Is the applicant or their agent here and they wish to speak? Come on up and make sure to state your name and who you represent for the record.
Okay, I'm good at that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dana Keeper. I'm with Cobite Engineering. I am the planner for the applicant. I just wanted to take a minute and thank Karina for her help and her excellent report on this file. Through you, Mr. Chair, I was hoping to speak a little bit more generally about infill development and the advantages it brings to your community. Firstly, you optimize existing infrastructure, including roads, sidewalks, and services like water, sewer, and gas. Building in existing neighborhoods helps save taxpayers money because additional roads, sewers, services, and infrastructure associated with building out are avoided. But infill development often has neighbors and established communities. So that is why I think our council chamber is probably filled tonight. Building a community takes different types and a variety of housing at different locations throughout the town. What this creates is a more complete community that offers everyone at all stages of life a place to live. Also, that people can join the neighborhood at different price points or stay in the neighborhood when they wish to downsize. It is not always about locating the same housing to match the existing housing. A development such as this offers opportunities for students, couples, and young professionals who may not have traditionally had the opportunity to live in a mature neighborhood, be given the opportunity to do so. On the other hand of the spectrum, it can offer an opportunity for seniors who wish to downsize to stay in a neighborhood that they have traditionally always lived in. Seniors and homeowners are often locked in and unable to downsize. Actually, sorry, I wanted to maybe highlight that I pulled this from your community planning report completed by Hertel Planning, which was an excellent report. While new residents struggle to find suitable options that meet their needs, many choose to travel to the area to work living elsewhere as they can't afford a suitable option in Saugeen Shores. Participants indicated that seniors, many of them who own houses, are unable to downsize into something smaller because there isn't an available supply. As a result, the individuals are stuck with too much house. If there are enough rental options or smaller homes, then this might allow for more flexibility and unlock space and value in the existing supply. Participants also noted that the effects of seniors seeking to downsize options may be a trend. I also wanted to highlight some of the stats obtained from the county website. Between 2016 and 2019, the vacancy rate for rental units in Saugeen Shores fell from 5.9% to 0.5%. This indicates an overall need for more rental housing stock to be added to the market to meet the growing demand. In recent years, housing unaffordability in Bruce County has been driven by three factors: a general shortage in new housing construction, a lack of diversity in built forms, and an increase in demand for housing as more people are coming to settle in Bruce County, driven by economic opportunities and the effect of COVID-19. There is a particular need for 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units in Bruce County. 2016, only 25% of all homes in Bruce County had 2 bedrooms or less. Did want to highlight for council that the 24 units that are proposed are going to be 2 bedrooms each. The bottom 4 units, so that will be 8 units in total, are going to be fully accessible, so wheelchair accessible. From 2016 to 2020, 812 medium to high density homes, such as apartment buildings, were constructed in Saugeen Shores. Given the demand for rental housing and the population of working age and senior households, the town looks to increase the proportion of medium to high density to accommodate the needs of current and future residents. So I'm throwing a lot of stats at you. Hope that I'm keeping up. But I did want to also highlight that in your community planning report, which did a large public outreach, nearly half of the respondents believe that there should be more apartments built in Saugeen Shores, and 32.4% agree that there are more row houses and walk-up apartments built in Saugeen Shores. So we're asking for a couple of reductions. One of note is the landscaped open space. We are hoping to accommodate the maximum amount of parking on the site. Infill lots can be challenging to accommodate everything that is needed. We simply, don't have the opportunity to make these lots any bigger. They're existing lots and existing neighborhoods. So I did want to highlight that we have got all the cars on the lot that is required by the zoning bylaw. And then we further located the majority of that landscaped open space at the busiest parts of the public realm. So the majority of the landscape space is going to be along Bricker and Mill Streets, and the largest reduction in landscape open space will be along the municipal lane, which can be assumed to be traveled less and have no sidewalks. I did also want to highlight that the development is located to a number of amenities and services that are in walking distances, and that the public amenity spaces are very accessible to this development. Finally, in conclusion, based on the research and work the town is doing, the developer has crafted a high-density functional site that is going to provide a different type and variety of housing to the Saugeen Shores market. Due to its location on the existing lot of record, we have requested amendments to the zoning bylaw to implement this development. The location is ideal for a high-density development due to its proximity to the downtown and is located in a transitionary area between commercial and residential uses. Located in the downtown are many 3-story buildings with little to no amenity space or landscaped open space. So we are somewhat in the middle between the two uses. That concludes my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kiefer. Are there any other representatives of the applicant who wish to speak, or you're it? Okay, very good then. So we will move on then to members of the public, and I have 5 members of the public here between, I'm just trying to cross-reference my 2 separate lists here, but I think I have 5 members of the public who have asked to speak. And so I'm going to go through that list of 5, and then if there's anybody else in the room after that who wishes to speak, then I'll make an opportunity available for that. So our first member of the public on my list is Mr. Jerry Moss. So we'll ask Mr. Moss to come up and take a seat there and give us your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the council and the planning committee for allowing me an opportunity to make a few comments. As Luke said, I'm Jerry Moss, and I'm a neighbor to the development just across Mill Street. I'm not sure exactly. I was sort of hoping, and Jay's informed me that there's no slides that you can see on a screen, but are you seeing slides on your computer or in a paper form? Okay, so I guess I will say next slide then when I need to. Thanks. And you're going to miss all the animation that I put in the slide deck, but I'll try and tell you about it. I'm not a stranger to the planning process. Many of the counselors know that I've been on both sides of the table, sometimes as a developer and sometimes as an opponent to a development. So I just wanted to explain that. I also want to acknowledge the planning department. They allowed me an extra day's grace to get my written submission in, instead of meeting the April 11th deadline. I was a bit late getting the supporting documents, and Karina made sure I got those actually the morning of the deadline. So she gave me an extra day to put in the submission. So I really appreciate that. So next slide, please. I think you should be looking at a slide of some unknown zoning maps. Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry. No, actually the one before that. Oh, maybe we're missing one. Okay. Well, I'll just try and make my points about the zoning maps. When a council develops a comprehensive bylaw and develops new zoning maps, they're pretty clean. And each zone is kind of discrete and identifies the uses that are possible and sets standards for each of those zoning areas. And there's not a lot of overlap, and there's not a lot of infilling shown up. But the next set of maps, which I think you are looking at now, is a more complex zoning map that shows a lot of infilling and shows a lot of zones that abut one another that weren't in the original plan. So that's, I think, the real challenge for a council and a planning committee at that point is when amendments come in, you want to respect the developer's interest in development and improving the community. And you also want to balance that with the fact that the bylaw was designed with the best of intentions, and it tried to be the very, very best bylaw it could possibly be, the way it is, without any amendment. So it's a real balancing act there, and that's this planning committee's responsibility. I'm on a slide now that has the word choices at the top of it, if that helps. Did we get that one in? Yeah, that's the one. Good, thanks. So the choices that you as a planning committee have to make try and balance a number of things. First of all, you look at the provincial policy priorities of intensification and infilling, the buzzwords of development these days. You look at increased density because we need more housing. You look at the character of the neighborhood. You look at how much change there might be for a particular neighborhood. You look at the population demand and many, many things. And you try and do your best at making a super decision. I like to think that this planning committee and this council always make good, better, or best decisions. And I'm confident that you're going to do that in this case as well. I read on the Ontario Citizens Guide to Land Use Planning what planning committees take into consideration when they develop a bylaw and what they take into consideration when they have an amendment to look at. One, it conforms to the official plan. Two, is it compatible with adjacent uses? Three, is it suitable land for the proposed purpose, including size, shape, setback, etc.? Is there adequate vehicular access and parking? And other issues like flooding and other safety issues. Those are some of the things that the province says that a planning committee looks at when they evaluate development. I also looked at the provincial policy statement. I actually read the 8 pages of the provincial policy statement in the last week. And there's a couple of things in there beyond intensification and infilling and increasing density that I think are worthy of noting. One says that council will implement the PPS in the context of local circumstance. So, and a lot of the policy statement has to do with big cities, as you know. It also says it recognizes diversity of municipalities in Ontario and the local context is important. It says policies provide flexibility in their implementation, provided that provincial interests are upheld. And lastly, it says avoiding development and land use patterns which may cause public health or safety concerns are to be avoided. So those are parts that don't get publicized, but it gives this kind of a small town council permission to not always hit the capital letter words that get inked in the press about what the policy statement says. Now I'm going to move on to a little bit less esoteric conversation here and get into some people issues. Slide number 5 is a slide that has a green background with a picture of some families in the middle of the page. Yeah, Cheryl has hers held up if you're looking for one like that. So this is to depict the number of families that would be present on this 3-lot parcel of land if the office residential zoning were to remain the same as it is now. And we're going to push it a little bit. Like the lots in that area of town are 66 by 132 in feet. Hopefully some people remember the feet. And if you push it to 50-foot frontage, you get 4 lots. And if you push that a little bit, the way council has moved, and you could build semi-detached homes on those lots, you would have 8 families. So that's what this picture supposed to show, is if you leave the zoning completely the same, you would accommodate 8 families at the most, really, because it doesn't allow for apartment building. Now the next slide is a bit fuller with families. It's got 24 families pictured on it. And that's the number of families that would be in the proposed apartment complex. So that's an increase of at least 300%. And that's happening right across the street from it. This is not in a zone that's planned for apartment buildings. This is in a zone that, well, up until about 15 years ago was R1 for the last 150 years. Then it was changed to office residential, and now we're looking at really increasing the density. I'd like to move on to slide 7 that has 10 cars pictured on it. You have that. So that shows about how many cars, in fact, the office residential zone with 8 families in it would likely park in that area. And the next slide, you will note, it actually has 30 cars, which is what the proposal is asking for. But I've put a few more cars in red because those 30 cars might, or those families may have visitors as well. And what I really want you to see about this is this slide is full of cars. So we'd be going from 10 cars to 24, 30, 36 cars. Now, this was the animation that I thought was really cool because I added cars to it. And as you add cars to this slide, you notice that the green background disappears. The green space, the landscape green space in this proposal is taken up by buildings and parking space. And there's very little left. And as we'll look at it in a few minutes, the proposal is to reduce the green space beyond even the R4 designation requirement. So I'd like to move on now to a bit more dense slide, which shows the reductions in a number of areas. It's a chart. And it starts out with a line on lot area. You got it. Okay. Few people found that one. Good. That's the first of 2. So I'm looking at the first of 2 that kind of look similar. So what I did is I took the chart that was in the planning report from the proponent, and I added an extra column, the column to the right, and that is a percentage change from the R4 requirement, not from the OR requirement, from the R4 requirement. So I'd like to highlight a few things here. Number one, the lot area. I know that the proponent's planner mentioned that you can't increase the size of infilling lots, and that's true. I agree with that. But what you can do is decrease the size of the development that you're trying to put on any given lot of a given size. So I just wanted to make that point. So there's a reduction in lot area from what the bylaw states as a requirement. If you look at the front and side yard down the chart, there's a reduction of 25%. So this development begins to look like it doesn't fit on this lot. And the rear yard is reduced by 43%. So those are huge reductions. I'm going to move to the next chart, which talks about a few more things. One I really wanted to talk about on here, on this chart, was the green space. And the green space is reduced, I think, from 30 to 18. For some reason, when I made my notes, I didn't copy that chart. So I think it's from 30% landscape open space down to 18%, which is a reduction of, maybe somebody can tell me what that is. Is it 40%? Okay. So these are significant reductions from what somebody in the planning of this bylaw thought were wise decisions to keep 30% of landscape green space. So you could argue that it might be unwise to reduce it that much. And let's see, where do I want to go here now? I want to jump ahead a little bit. I think I'll jump ahead to the character of the neighborhood. So I'm looking at a slide now that has some pictures of features of different houses in our neighborhood on Mill Street. And I didn't take the whole house picture. I just took pictures of some of the features that give you a flavor of what era these houses were built in, some of the more classic kinds of windows, dormers, porches, and shutters, etc. And that's the kind of neighborhood that we live in. And I don't know if any of you have driven down Mill Street just east of the post office or not, but you'll recognize maybe some of those places. And it is 150 years old. My house has the floor joists in the old part of the house are not milled lumber. They're cedared logs with the bark still on them in the old part of my basement. So we're, you know, people have spent money to preserve the look of their home. My next door neighbors spent, I don't even want to know how much money having his brick cleaned, so it was nice and tidy when he moved in. And we have people that have done other improvements to siding and put on more expensive porches and so on to reproduce the classic look of the neighborhood. They were doing this thinking that they had sort of a consistent neighborhood that was going to kind of stay that way for a while. And so there is some money tied up in keeping our neighborhood that way. Not only that, we like the aesthetics. So it's not all about money. Slide 12 just shows a picture of an apartment should council and planning committee approve a kind of an apartment that wouldn't fit in. But we've seen those built, and we've all seen recent developments in the town that you drive by and you wonder, did we really exercise any architectural control over that in the site planning process or not? That they just don't seem to fit. And yet others, councils have done a good job of, or planning teams have done a good job of exercising architectural control. And I think specifically of, well, what's the name of Max Milk now? Circle K in Southampton. I believe that there was some architectural control power used to ask the proponent there to put a gable roof on, it's basically a cement block building, put a gable roof on with some dormers and some windows. And it actually kind of fits into an older classical neighborhood just because of a few of those features were added. And so
Jerry, we have passed over 15 minutes now, so if you would just get to your wrap
Okay.
up your comments, I'd be appreciated.
okay, I'm going to go on to a slide last. I don't want to miss this one that shows a three-story apartment building next to a small home. It's probably 5 slides from the back. And this was a good animation too, because the first part of the slide showed the little house built right next to the lot line on Mill Street. And this is a superimposition of an apartment building that would be right next to that property line as well with it. And the proponent has actually asked to reduce that side yard rather than to increase it, because this seems to be a real conflict of zoning uses and built form. So now the proponent did talk about putting in a barrier between the two zones. So that's a good thing. I hope the barrier is considerable considering the variation in between the two. I'd like to go then to our the last few slides. Our first choice would be to leave the OR zoning alone and allow 4 or 8 single family homes or semi-detached homes. There'd still be a return for the developer. Maybe not as large a return as an apartment complex, but it certainly would fit into the neighborhood much better. Second choice, if council must approve, it feels it must approve an apartment complex, then choose an R3 zoning change and downsize the apartment to 16 units. That's still a lot of cars, but it does increase the green space. It doesn't cause as much problem with setbacks and parking and lot coverage. And it certainly would decrease traffic noise and the hectic pace in our neighborhood. I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to make my comments. Luke said he somehow got my name twice on the list, so I thought I had twice the time. But
I think I gave it to you, Jerry. I think I gave it to
I
you.
think I gave it to you. Okay, so thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them briefly.
Sure. All right, well, we're just going to keep moving on,
Okay.
Jerry. So we're going to go on to our next members of the public, and they are Tom and Jennifer Saunders, and they are here in the room. Sure, that'd be fine. Yeah, have a seat there and we'll figure out a way to make the technology swing back and forth between you. All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you, council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Okay, how's that? Has council had a chance to read this engineering report? Have you all been given a copy of this?
Yeah,
Okay.
council has all the documents. Yep.
Okay, so this is something that an applicant can just pay for and have produced for them. There's a lot of fluff and stuff in here that doesn't pertain to Saugeen Shores. It's very generalized. It pertains to problem areas that are actually having problems with lack of housing and lack of rental units, like the GTA and larger urban areas. Not so much Saugeen Shores, which has what I see as a temporary lack of rental units, and that's due to what we all know is Bruce Power's MCR, Major Component Replacement Program, and that's also temporary. So if we go ahead and build and intensify and infill every available spot, or every spot that's applied for, at some point we might have a situation where everybody can have an apartment. People that want to have one can have one, and that'd be great. But what's going to happen when 12, 13 years from now, actually probably 11 years from now, when the MCR is over and we're stuck with a glut of apartments? That could backfire. Also in this report, there's a lot of mention of infill and intensification. And to me, those terms are buzzwords used mainly by planners and the provincial government. And I think it's a way of kind of buying time for them till they find a better solution for the problem that we're in with the lack of housing and lack of rental units. And again, I don't think intensification has there's no case for it here in Saugeen Shores, in my opinion. I'm going to read you the submission that I was lucky enough to get in on time to the planning department. We have just become aware of the proposed plans involving the rezoning and construction of a massive 24-unit apartment complex across from us. Our neighborhood is presently a quiet and historical one. Our home, the George House, was built in 1865 by one of the founders of this community, James George. Our home, alongside the church rectory and the church, stand out as an important part of the original Victorian design buildings that still add charm and beauty to Port Elgin today. I'm not saying that we're not open to any development across from us, but hopefully it's going to be a tastefully designed structure that fits into the area. That's one important aspect. We are not supportive of the zoning and the variances applied for. Other people in the area build out buildings and additions, including ourselves, and we happily abide by the rules. I realize the developer is going to ask for the world and expect to be granted something less. Hopefully. I have read my neighbor Jerry Moss's submission, and I can say he's hit every important point that we and other people are concerned about. I must also mention now that in the planning report done independently, the term intensification is used to support their case. In my opinion, Saugeen Shores isn't in a position of necessary intensification and infill. I've already gone over this. I won't repeat it. I won't dwell on that point for now, and to get some real problems that will arise after the construction of an oversized tenancy like the ones that's proposed. 1.25 parking spots per unit is just not enough. It's fair to assume that each unit will have 2 registered cars. Plus, there'll be guest parking required. We don't want to see the overflow end up on our presently safe and quiet street. I myself have to maintain 125 feet of grassy boulevard in front of my home now. I will be less inclined to do so if the street in front of our home becomes a congested overflow parking choice. We run a B&B out of our home, and lack of parking in front of our house would be a problem for our client. My point is that some changes to the present parking bylaws will need to be addressed. I'm open to discussing this at some point with the right people when that time comes. The private engineering report also mentions that the development lands are underused. Well, we have a very large lot, and lots of the space on either side of our home is also underused. I suppose you could say it's underused. Does this mean that we should intensify it in some way to appease the government and the town? And also, who is building this thing? We've seen some big failures in this town before when it comes to timelines, safety, and professionalism. I won't go into too much detail, but there's a project presently going on at the corner of Mary and Goderich, which is a good example of one that's taking far too long to complete. They're utilizing unskilled workers, and they have an owner that thinks he can take as long as he needs to complete construction. Not to mention the fact that 2 of the walls have collapsed in the last couple of years, luckily not injuring or killing anybody. My point is, will the town put the stipulations in the building permission to ensure this type of unprofessionalism doesn't repeat itself at the project in question? And will the town enforce construction standards and milestones that are enforceable to ensure that the residents of the area aren't tortured by unnecessary time frames and construction methods? So in conclusion, no zoning changes, including setback. Don't create a parking problem. Make sure the construction contract, if there is one, is awarded to a company that has a proven record of professionalism, safety, and concern for the environment around their site. Respectfully, Thomas and Jennifer Saunders.
Thank you. Did you have any comments, Ms. Saunders? Just to turn the mic so that you're speaking into it. There you go.
Can you hear me? Well, my name's Jennifer Saunders, and as Thomas said, very, very well. He's represented our feelings and thoughts, but I just want to add. Thomas did say that we have actually
we have had a development ourselves. We took down the coach house. It was sinking. It was very sad to see it go, but we it's still under construction, a garage, new garage being built. But we actually saved as many of those bricks. So the bricking outside will be the original bricks from the coach house, and we're sourcing some more what we can to finish it in keeping with the neighborhood and the historical values of it. My concerns over the also, and I've sent a video out to council today, I think you've received it, is the worrying of there is nowhere for, if there's buildings, if people have dogs, which we all have dogs, there is nowhere to exercise and on that property and to let those dogs go and do their business. They would most obviously be right across on the boulevard sidewalk, grass verge area, which Thomas maintains, Jerry, Steve, our neighbour in the old rectory, and Mill Creek Chocolates, they actually maintain the front too and their property. So it is a huge concern because there's nowhere else for pets to go to toilet. So that would become their toilet. I am also opposed to the any parking or an entrance or exit off of Mill Street. I would rather it would be quicker because there is very little traffic up our street. There are 3 houses our side and 2 the other. So it would be increase in traffic and noise. I can't imagine it being an apartment building. So if council does decide to allow apartment building, it would have to be significantly reduced in size, 1 building or 2 smaller units. And there needs to be green space for those animals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to you both. So now we're going to go on to our third public presentation from a member of the public, and it's actually 2 individuals, Eric Prybalowski and Mary Ann Sanvito. And we'll ask them to come up. I apologize for my pronunciation of your last name, sir. I hope you'll correct me.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, and the Planning Committee for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Eric Prybalowski, and my wife is Mary Ann Sanvito. We live at 691 Mill Street. I'm not opposed to changes in progress, but I suggest there are better ways to use the property under the current bylaw with minimal disruptions to the bylaw or any of the setbacks. Jerry went into a lot of detail about things like that. I do object to the proposed recommendation. This area here, particularly on Mill Street, is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Port Elgin, consisting mainly of older single dwelling homes, some small converted apartments, and some small businesses. Increased traffic will occur to an already busy intersection at Mill and Bricker, mainly because of the post office. Parking allotments appear to be underestimated. I realize there's a formula, but if you're building 2-bedroom apartments, these days it would be common to have each resident having a car themselves. There are several young families in the area. And as a result of those comments, I'm submitting to you that you keep this zoned area to facilitate its original intent. Thank you very much again for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Presbolowski. All right, and now we'll move on then to Ms. Kathy Gettings. Ms. Gettings. Oh, you're not? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. How about Jane Ether?
First of all, I'd like to thank Gary for his very comprehensive submission to this commission. It's hard to follow that really. But my name is Jane Pether and I am concerned, as everybody in the neighbourhood is, with this build. I did receive hard copies of all the information that was sent regarding how the land was going to be used, and find it very difficult and confusing for me as a layperson to understand all the technology. I first started off with the infill housing. Now, I'm not sure everybody's aware of how that works, but what I read, it said that the zone, an R4 zoned neighbourhood is housing that fits within that existing neighbourhood without significantly altering its character or appearance. It's affordable, low rise, multi-unit housing, hence the 24-unit. Frankly, I don't think that fits this neighbourhood, but then I'm only paying taxes to the town here. Amendment 1 wants to increase the maximum permitted density as a local official plan amendment. It means on that piece of property that there's going to be a proposed 24 units / townhouses, which was mentioned, on a 0.24 hectare parcel of land, which in my terminology is roughly just over half an acre. I think that's a little tight to put all those units on that half acre plot of land. The rezoning site from office residential. I never understood the office residential zoning because nobody ever lived in that present building. It was always an office building. To residential fourth density special. Okay, so I'm looking at getting into checking it all out and saying mid-density infills of up to 3 full stories and containing 8 or 12 apartments are cost effective to build. So that tells you everything really. It's cheaper than putting anything else on there. If both of these are approved, they will replace the existing building currently occupied by Broker Link Insurance. There's a couple of little things in that information that I found a little odd. It says the COVID engineering in submission says on 2.0, the proposed development will consist of 2 12-unit, 3-story apartment buildings. The parking will be accessed from Bricker Street and the unnamed lane to the south and exist onto Waterloo Street. Now, isn't Waterloo Street that way? I'm thinking, you know, what's all that about? Now, the unnamed lane, it seems as though it's the fire lane. The fire lane backs right onto my property, and there's enough traffic going down there with the Broker Link people and the people from the, anyway, there's enough traffic going down there. Now we're going to increase it by all those 24 cars or more. So that was a bit of a concern. That was a lot of a concern for me. Anyway, going away from that technical part of it, or non-technical as I'm putting it, I'm going to talk like everybody else about the neighbourhood. This is one of the oldest residential areas in Port Elgin and was first developed in and around 1880. The former United Church building stands tall and proud on the corner of Bricker Street and Mill Street and is now occupied by Mill Creek Chocolates, as it was said. The former manse is located next door, and the George House, built in 1865, to the east of that, and Jerry Moss's family are next door to that, are cornering onto Pilker Street. Currently, east of the current insurance office, there's a small property, once a cottage, wedged between my property and the proposed bill. My house is 660 Hilker Street, was built in 1870 for the jailer, believe it or not. That's who used to live there. The Pethers have owned this property for 50+ years. All these homes have been extensively renovated over the years, which is a testament to their longevity. We are proud of our neighbourhood, very proud of it. The property currently owned by Ms. Mars was originally built and paid for by the Port Elgin United Church for their administration office. When the church moved to Brick Street, it was sold and later in 2003 purchased by Ackett Insurance. The building was built in 1970, as it was said in the report, and has gone through extensive renovations over its 53 years. As part of the proposal, this building will be demolished to accommodate the 24 apartments, creating an environmental nightmare. What's going to happen to all that stuff in that building? They're just going to come with a wrecking ball and knock it out, and that'll be the end of it. I don't think that's acceptable in these day and age. I mean, something perhaps could be done with that building that would make it more a better usage for it. Anyway, the entire property is 3 town lots in size, of which is the existing building stands on 2 of them. It's a very well maintained summer and winter. Along Mill Street, there are several mature red maple trees with parking used by Mill Creek Chocolate employees. My concerns, like everybody, is the traffic. It's also the privacy and loss of green space. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Evan. Okay, so that's the end of my list. Are there other folks in the gallery this evening who would like to speak to this application? Or is there anybody else online? I guess I'll ask the clerk too. Is there anybody online at all at this point who'd like to speak, or? You looking to speak, Blair?
Currently online.
Sure. Okay, we have Mr. Eby here who would like to speak, so we'll bring him in. You just state your name for the record there, Blair.
Good evening. My name is Blair Eby. I live at 709 Mill Street. I will keep this very brief. As you know, or have heard today, we have a very nice neighborhood. You've noticed everyone that spoke referred to everyone else by their first name. That's just how it is. And I may just go off the political correctness vote, if I may, maybe address the white elephant in the room, or the elephant in the room, I apologize. The rental units that will be built, as we've seen in other parts of our neighborhood, are they going to be geared to income? Will they be subsidized home? I was just sort of curious about that. That is my main concern. I know everyone says, no, not in my backyard. We already have it in our backyard. We literally have residents coming through our backyard as it is. That is a concern. I know affordable housing is a very important topic for this day and age, but we have seen the problems in our neighborhood, and I don't think we need any more of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess that Mr. Eby did have a question there, and maybe I will put that to the planner or to the applicant to ask what form of tenancy is proposed for this project, and is there is there any arrangement around geared income housing, CMHC, subsidized housing, et cetera, Maybe you could expand on that a bit.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. No plans at this time to do a rent geared to income or subsidized housing. I would make the statement that it's likely to be more attainable housing, but at this time it's not planned to be subsidized.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to the application that's before us right now? I don't see anybody jumping up, so with that, then I will declare the public portion of this meeting over, and we will move on now to actually, I should just say, I'll ask the clerk if there are any written submissions that were not already discussed in the planning report that we haven't received at this point. The answer is no. Okay. So then we will move on to hearing from members of the committee. So I'll ask if any committee members have any questions with regard to the application. So we'll take, actually what I'll do, my apologies, my script is a little out of whack with what we're actually doing here because things have changed a little bit. We're actually going to consider a recommendation. So what I'm going to do is I will read the recommendation and then we'll take questions or comments from members of the committee. So it is recommended that council adopt local official plan amendment L 2023-003 as attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to county council for approval. And the committee approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 2022-093 as attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. So we'll take questions or comments from members. So we'll go to Councilor Mayette and then Councilor Halpin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the presentation and all of the speakers. It's very passionate to hear what people think of their neighborhoods, and and you should be proud of your neighborhoods. My question is to the developer, Donna, or maybe the planner rather, because she was part of her initial comments was that the current zoning is an R3 commercial residential. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the current zoning on the property is office residential.
Office residential. And what is the density allowed in that zone?
The housing format in that zone is geared more towards single family detached or accessory structure to a commercial. And so there's no specific density provision. It would be considered low density.
Like a R1.
Correct.
All right. And so they're seeking to have that bumped up to R4, which would allow 90 to 102 persons per hectare. Is that right?
That's correct. So the high density policies in the local official plan, it's between 40 and 90 units per gross hectare. And the applicant is specifically looking to increase that on the site.
Okay, so under the current zoning, you could have up to 90 unit persons per hectare.
That's correct. It would equate to about 22 units for this property.
22 units. Okay. And they're asking to build 24 units.
That's correct.
So really, they're just looking for a very slight increase in density with this proposal,
That's correct.
like 2 people per hectare. So it would seem to me, in order to make this fit, either the zoning has to go up or the development has to go down. Would that be a reasonable option, the options that are before it?
That's correct. The applicant could build within the current R4 zoning requirements, or they could, as they have done presently, request relief from some of those provisions in the R4 zone.
Okay, did you want to comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, appreciate the opportunity. It's going to be 3 stories and 4 units each, which it just squares up quite nicely. So 4 units, bottom floor that are going to be fully accessible, 4 units, 4 units. So the increase of 2 extra units above the density just helps us square up that building, be able to be built easier.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Halpin.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thanks everyone who spoke, and I read every email that I got and went over them, considered them. Thank you for your presentation. There is a need for more housing here. And Ontario, one caveat we need to remember is that Ontario eats up 300 acres of farmland per day. 2,100 acres per week. That's never going to be replaced. So density is a good environmental choice. I think that we can, to a degree, have our cake and eat it too. But what I would say for this development is that we need to maintain the 30% green space. And if you maintain the 30% green space, then that would allow us to maintain the character of the neighborhood with a bit more greenery and everything around it. There's, the council is currently considering our intensification guidelines, and I know that they aren't through yet, but also with those in the spirit of that, when the building is designed, it could have architectural features or something that, it's not acceptable, or it wouldn't be reasonable to say, we want you to build that just like the George House. Okay, but it could be something that fits in or reflects the neighborhood. And so I would support this if we maintained a 30% green zone. And I realize that's going to mean less apartments. But that's how I feel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further comments from members, Councilor Grace and then Stack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A number of my questions have been answered already, but I do, just following on Councillor Mayette's line of questioning about the density. So several of our speakers suggested that a compromise of 16 units, so 8 per building, while not ideal in their mind, might be an acceptable compromise. So if that was the case, what would that density be? It would certainly fall between the 40 to 90 for the range, I imagine. And do you have a sense of what the green space percentage would be if we went to that?
I did maybe want to highlight for council that apartments are vertical. So a reduction in number of units, likely because we're going for a fully accessible unit on the bottom floor, which has more space requirements, would just bring us down a level and wouldn't change the actual footprint of the buildings.
So the density would not be, what would the density be?
Density is calculated in a units per hectare. So it would be, I don't have my calculator on me, but it would be 16 units divided by the hectare size times 10,000. To do it quick.
Could somebody get me that calculation or get us that? I think that would be at least illuminating for me. I understand your point about the footprint and therefore the green space would still be 18%.
There would be an associated reduction in parking. So likely there would be more green space on the site. How we configured it would depend. But
so there is the possibility then that the green space could be increased.
potential.
Yeah.
But your footprint and your setbacks and your flow onto the site is going to be the same.
So we've already heard that this would not likely have any kind of affordable housing. And to me, one of the, somebody, I guess Jerry spoke about the balance of what we have to decide upon. For me, maintaining traditional neighborhood character, maintaining traditional neighborhood character of our towns is very, very important. And I appreciate, Ms. Heather, all the information you gave us about the heritage of your neighborhood. That was interesting and it's valuable. It's valuable not just for our quality of life, to protect our culture, but it's also valuable, I've always maintained, and many others, economically, because that's what makes our town appealing. That's what makes people want to be here and to live here, by maintaining the character of those buildings. They're precious resources for many reasons. So if we are not getting any affordable housing out of this proposal, and I understand the argument about increasing the supply of housing, and theoretically, that is then, you know, if the supply goes up, then the price goes down eventually, and it's more attainable for more people. I understand that, but I like Councillor Halpin would like to see a compromise. And so it sounds possible for us to increase, lower the density, increase the green space, if we decrease the number of parking spaces. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Stack.
Thank you. A couple of quick questions. So, on the, or I guess to the builder, would the builder be interested in putting, you know, committing to some additional privacy screens on the property that goes beside the lot? So I guess that's my first question, because I know there's some feedback in the correspondence received around privacy, particularly around.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The property will undergo something called site plan control. The municipality can make requests in that additional privacy, things like fencing, landscaping can be required and provided. I think I would reiterate that my clients are very committed to keep building and aesthetically pleasing, both building and lot. So they're very open to these conversations that happen in the future.
And then maybe just some comments. So I heard all the feedback from the participants today, and just for full disclosure, I live just around the corner. I live right at the corner of Christopher and Bricker. So I'm aware of the impact. I drive Bricker Street every day. But I have to tell you, to me, 8 accessible units in a community that struggles with accessibility is really important to me. I'm the chair of the accessibility committee for the community. And, you know, in Ontario, including in Saugeen Shores, accessible housing is an ongoing challenge. So to me, I really see that as an important path forward. And I think we've talked a lot about in this chamber about the importance of trees, maintaining trees. And so to me, one of the additional benefits here is that we're using an existing lot that has a building that frankly is not aesthetically pleasing. And so I think where I would prefer to go is some strong commitments from the developer to ensure that we hear the feedback from the community around the aesthetics of the building to the extent that it can align with the homes in the surrounding area. I think that would be something that I would support. But I have to say, to me, accessible housing just continues to be a challenge as our community ages and as we continue to see folks with a variety of accessibility issues, which, you know, again, coming into this, I'm new in role and having chaired the accessibility committee now a couple of times and hearing some of the challenges we have. And, you know, there's a variety of accessibility challenges, but let's just focus on accessible or physical accessibility. I think that's really important. And, you know, I'm trusting that the 4 accessible units per building would be a feature that doesn't you know, go the way of the dodo as we continue down the process. So, you know, on the whole, I think I support this development for the reasons I've described.
Thank you. So I got Counselor Davinsky, and then I'll get the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. If I could ask, a 3-story apartment building, how would the developer settle to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. I think every unit helps the cash flow and profitability. So like truthfully, they're asking for 3 stories because that's the business model that they're hoping to achieve. So an 8-unit reduction or 1/3 is going to be quite substantial.
All right. So you get a 3-story apartment building. How high is that?
The proposed height is 10 meters. Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. So now you've got the homeowners on the east side of the development, I believe. And I also believe that one of that home is on part of your property, or the developer's property. So that would have to be taken into account. But I didn't see a lot of landscaping there, existing landscaping. And I was going around the area a couple of days ago. And what kind of privacy would be guaranteed the homeowners, particularly in the East End, where you're almost abutting right up to the property line?
Through you again, Mr. Chair. I would note for council that the permitted height in the R4 zone is 12 meters. And the permitted height in the R3 zone is 12 meters as well. So should it go down a zone, it's actually higher than what we're proposing. Echoing my comments to Councillor Stack, I think my clients are very open to having these site plan control discussions, including things like landscape buffering and fencing, should council want to require that to ensure increased privacy between the two uses.
And I would assume that your developer would also be open to having these apartment buildings meld into the neighborhood rather than being the square blocks of cement.
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, yes, I don't think my client is out to build Jerry's picture on his development. They're very committed to, they have operated out of that as their business in the past. They're well versed in what the community is like. I think they're fairly committed to building an aesthetically pleasing development for there.
I'm still not sold on the landscaping, open space being reduced to 18% from 30. I too would like to see the 30% in that area. I would like to see the number of units reduced, but that's business. You're trying to make a dollar. And I would like to see an increase in the amount of amenity space, so on. Now, what about this dog pooping problem?
Okay, we can't have, we gotta maintain order here, please. So we'll get Counselor, put your question and tell me who you're putting it to,
Yes.
please.
Will there be any areas within the development that would allow renters, and it's all rental, right? There's no purchasing, would allow rentals to have an animal, a pet, and take that pet outside to do its business? Has that been looked at, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I would say probably, first of all, that pet ownership in apartment buildings is significantly probably less than in a house. It's not that it doesn't happen for sure, but it's maybe not as common as in a single detached house. We'll say also, if I hold up a site plan or you guys look at it, there is grass all around the outside. So in between the house to the this side, this is all grass and this is all grass as well. It is a pretty short jaunt away from the Saugeen Rail Trail as well. So should they want to go walk their dog or anything like that, they're going to be able to access those amenities.
Okay, I think those are my questions, Mr. Mayor, and I just wanted to remember that those homes on the east side boundary. I don't know if you're gonna have people looking down at them or what, or if that side of the apartment building would be like the stair side where there are very few windows, nobody lives there to get to their apartments. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, final architecturals on the building are complete. So it's not a question I can answer with full knowledge, to be honest.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I have the deputy mayor, then I have Counselor Duhame, and you have your hand up again. So I'll get Counselor Halpin after that. So Huber, Duhame, then Halpin.
Thank you, and through you. I'm glad that Dana from Cobide mentioned the grass. A strip of green grass that's 9 or 10 feet around a building of this bulk is really just a strip that's very skinny. So the green space idea is not coming through the site plan for me on this at all. And when you talk about open space, you look at it and the vast majority of open space on this is related to parking. And I also found it interesting that, the big pitch was made for, the 8 accessible units that would be on the first floor. There's no guarantee that they would be rented. It has accessible units. There's no way of necessarily requiring somebody perhaps to get into that unit who fits into that category. But what's interesting to me is when I looked at the parking plan, only one of the parking spaces on the whole site has the sticker on it, on the drawing, related to accessible parking. Now, that could be just an oversight, but then I looked more carefully and the size of the parking stalls are indicative of regular cars. So you have 8 accessible units and 1 handicap spot. That to me is a little bit of a disconnect. I'm also concerned about the use of a municipal lane that doesn't have a name, has Mrs. Pether, who, thank you very much, by the way, for your comments. I did not know that the jail had been there. So that was a big learning moment for me when you said that. And describing the lane as a fire lane. It's not a complete municipal street. And when you look at the drawing, it appears as though the into parking is all coming in that way. And of course, it's adjacent to a municipal parking lot. Are we preparing ourselves to have residential parking being taken care of by a residential parking lot that is paid for by a taxpayer contributions to operations? I don't see the parking thing coming off that laneway, which is technically not a legitimate road. It's a fire lane as it was described. So I'm not getting that at all. I really appreciated a lot of the input from neighbors and whoever said that you called each other by name. That's pretty powerful stuff. So I'm glad you've built that up in your neighborhood. The place for intensification, sorry, is the right spot and the right style. This is a good spot for some increased density because it's so close to downtown and it's on a Bricker Street and that sort of thing. But the style then plays into it too. So, you don't just fill up a space when it's in an area that's surrounded by a different kind of filling of the space. So I get the idea of increasing intensification in this area, but it has to be the right style. And I'm not convinced that this is the right style. I found it interesting too, and it might just have been an oversight too. There was absolutely no comments from the Blue Water School Board. So, we would assume that building apartments, I don't believe that, they're intended to be family units, but normally we get a comment. Usually it doesn't go very far, but there's at least a comment there from the school board because, certainly this particular location would feed right into most likely St. Joseph's and Saugeen Central. And it was interesting that there was no school board comment. I believe we do need more rental units in Saugeen Shores and in particular close to downtowns. And I believe that they should be attainable, affordable, whatever the interpretation is of those things. I don't believe this hits the mark though on that. So I'm reserving my support and I hope we make a decision to defer the application to enable a little more information from the public meeting to be taken into account. Because I think, and it is just a drawing, I get that. But if there's a sense that there's all this accessibility being built into this, build it into the drawing too, so that we can see that, first of all, there's appropriate parking for people that would have an accessible unit. Second of all, that we're not relying so heavily on a fire lane. And third of all, that there's actually a place outside where somebody can, step out from their unit and maybe like even sit outside their unit. But on one side, it appears to me as though there's about 9 feet of grass and then the sidewalk and then the road. And on the part that faces Bricker, it's about 10 feet, I believe. You got a lot of people in there And again, we don't have a complete design for the building, but I would assume that there will be access to the outside, but there's not really outside here. So I'm not against the idea of an increased density. I think it needs to be more gentle though in this location. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We'll get Councillor Duhane next.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mayor. I think this area is probably more suited for, as one of the residents, I think it was Jerry Moss said, maybe 6 to 8 townhouses. I think that increases the density, and then those townhouses can be designed architecturally to match the neighborhood potentially. 24 units in that small area. Now I know it fits the guidelines, but I think that would be well suited on the edges of town, like on the north side of Port Elgin. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have now Helpin, and then I have Grace, and I see Stack again. So we'll go around again. You have, why don't we, I don't know what's happening with the, oh geez, okay. We thought we were having electrical issues in here, but okay, I'm glad it was something simple. All right, so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going back around, I'm going to go to the Vice Deputy Mayor first, and then I'm going to carry on. Okay.
Yeah,
the
thank
Vice
you, Mr.
Deputy Mayor.
Mayor, and I do support some intensification on this property. I think I won't be supporting the recommendation this evening, though. I think we should be receiving the report and taking into consideration comments from the residents, comments from members of council, and send it back to the developer and come up with something I think a little bit different than what we're seeing. We've got 460 residents on the application wait list with Bruce County housing wait list, and there's a need for rental properties. It's we can't question that. There is a need for, it was 0% at one point, it's at 0.5 now. We have a need for rental units, and I like the accessible units on the bottom floor. I've argued for since I've been on council 9 years that 30% of landscape is important. I fought that hard actually, and I'm caught between a rock and a hard place because I'm also a huge supporter of bringing in additional housing for those in need, and so by willing to bend a little bit on the landscape in the downtown core, walkability. So I'm caught with that one because. We need this housing. I'm not sure it's 24 units. I think it needs to be received and sent back. And but I think it's a square peg into a round hole. I think it might be a little small to cite what we're talking 24 units. So it'd be nice to send it back. And I guess the other question I had was whether it's Jay or the planner, but when we get right down to the nuts and bolts of this thing for a condition of approval, and Ron, Jerry Moss talked about this complementary classic designs, which I think is, the character of the neighborhood is important. And to the planner, whichever way this council goes in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever it is, come back with slight changes. I think changes are going to be required. What I'm hearing around the council table. Can that be a condition of approval or not, where the design architecturally is, fits in with that neighborhood, a complementary classic design that Jerry talks about. Is it when we grade down to the final decision, can that be made as a condition of approval or not, with whatever the design to look like to fits in with the character of the neighborhood? I don't think so, but can it be?
We'll ask the developer, or we'll ask the planner.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. We would typically not include a stipulation or provision in the zoning bylaw with respect to architectural compatibility. That would typically be an item that would be addressed through site plan control, and there are policies in respect to that.
I thought that would be the answer, but I just wanted to hear it. I think that anything that the developer can do to ensure that it fits in architecturally with the character of the neighborhood, I just think would really be a wise thing to do. The last point I want to make, Mr. Mayor, is that, that lane to the south, I've always felt that parking lot is pretty barren. And I always thought that landscaping at the south end of this development, the north end of the parking lot, which we own, there's the lane, and then there's There's the curbs, the barriers there for the parking into the lane. I think there's about 6 feet there, 6, 7 feet. And I'm just wondering if that's something ultimately the developer again. With landscaping on that south side, on the parking lot side. I think that's something you might want to consider, that we can landscape that side as well. And in addition to Bricker and Mill, I think we need to do something on that south side. So anyways, I can't support the recommendation tonight. I think we need to receive it and send it back to the developer.
Yeah, so I do have an alternate recommendation, which I'll introduce once we've heard from everybody. So I have 3 more members of council lined up here, so I'll look for short comments from each of them.
Yes, excuse me, point of order. My understanding that the purpose of the public meeting that we're here for tonight is to hear the presentation from the developer and the planner, hear from the public their thoughts on the matter, and to give council members or planning committee members, in this case, who are ultimately going to be on the council who are going to vote on this thing, an opportunity to ask questions of the developer or the planner for clarification purposes, as opposed to wading into the area of rendering an opinion or recommending changes or commenting on the appropriateness of any aspect of the development. Where what and that's what I tried to stick to. What I'm hearing a lot of here is, I don't like this, I don't like that, it should be more of this, less of that.
So there's a recommendation that's been offered by the administration, recommending that council does indeed adopt the local official plan amendment and approve the zoning bylaw amendment. But the word that is, so what you just described there is what we would have traditionally done.
Yeah.
But the world is changing a bit here because of changes from the provincial government, requiring us to move more quickly. And so, so it requires us to consider these things more expeditiously than we used to. In that process, it would have taken us 40 days to get from this stage to approval, and we just cannot, by law, we cannot have those kinds of delays. So, so we all have our opinions on that, but that's what it is. So I do have another suggestion for a resolution, which is going to hopefully be in line with what council is thinking here. And I'll come to that. Okay. So another real quick round from 3 more, and then we're going to get to a decision. Councillor Help.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. I just wanted to say that I have faith in the proponent and I have faith in Cobide Engineering that they would do a good job. Their walls wouldn't fall down. And I'm sure that they would do it in a timely fashion. And I look forward to working with the planner and the residents to come up with a good solution for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a clarification question from Dana. And that's about the accessible apartments, which I understand in your proposal would be on the ground floor. And so if the amount, if there was a compromise where the amount was reduced to 8 in each building instead of 12, would those ground floor apartments still be accessible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, truthfully, I can't answer that question with a full knowledge.
Is it a guarantee that they would be accessible now?
Yes, yep, that's the plan. The business plan, as I said, and the financing is predicated on the amount of units. Should those amount of units change, I'm not sure where the development would land.
Thank you.
Councillor Stack.
So one question, is there going to be, and I think the point was well taken from the deputy mayor. Is the plan to guarantee at least a first come first serve or the first right of refusal for accessible tenants for those for the accessible rental unit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think that has been fully thought through. That it's pretty premature at this stage. We're still standing around the table talking about the use right now. So that's not a question that I can answer for sure.
And I think my comment, just sort of reflecting on the feedback today, is this council talks a lot about intensification and density, and that every time we come with a building, and you know, I myself as well, we talk about density and intensification, there seems to be a real reluctance to make a decision that develops on an intensification basis, using the land we have rather than expanding out, clearing more trees, reducing the overall green space available in the community. So I just think whatever the decision is today, I think it's pretty clear where I stand. I think if we're not going to make those types of approvals, we need to rethink the mantra around intensification and density, because we're saying we want it, and there seems to be a real reluctance to actually move forward with that, with any type of intensification that's not out in the middle of nowhere in the town. And in terms of developing logically, I'm not sure that that's the best path forward. And then just to sort of confirm my bona fides, in terms of where I live, I am 600 meters from this lot, so it will directly affect me. So I want the folks in the room to understand that I will be directly affected by this. So I'm not speaking as someone that doesn't live right at the corner of Christopher and Bricker, that doesn't see the traffic. And, when I was campaigning, one of the things I'd like to see some traffic controls on several of the streets in our neighborhood. So I say this so that, clearly there's going to be some disagreement with my position on this, but I am quite literally a neighbor of this potential development. And with all that said, I do support, because I do think we need intensification. It has to be in the downtown core. We can't just spread it out where it's not near anybody, because it's just not practicable going forward. And it doesn't align with the commitments we've made as a council to move towards density and intensification.
Yeah, so thank you for those comments. So I'll make a couple of comments myself. I think, some good conversation around the table on this issue. I think, we hear, as Councillor Stack, I think, is articulated, we hear whenever density is proposed, that it ought to be closer to amenities. We hear that, we've just been talking about that with Copley, right? Folks say when that density is proposed out there, you should get it within walking distance to the amenities in the community. That's where the most density should be built. And actually, very often when we talk about good planning, that's what you do. You build higher density closer to your core areas, right? I think most people would agree that that's where you want to have higher density located, and so here we have a piece of property which is located literally right on the doorstep of downtown Port Elgin. It's about as close to downtown Port Elgin as you can get. It's got institutional uses around it, right? It's got the old church across the street from it, which is zone core commercial, but it's an institutional use now, more of a commercial use. It's got the Port Elgin Post Office across the street, or an institutional piece of property. It's got a municipal parking lot on one side of it. It's a pretty institutional commercial location located right on the board, right on the side downtown Port Elgin. I think, as Councillor Stack has pointed out, we talk about needing density, and we talk about where we need density. And when we talk about those things, proximity to our cores is one of the places you're looking for. This is, it's not a 6-story, 200 unit apartment. It's a 3-story, 24 unit apartment, which gets some rental opportunities close to that core commercial area. And and when you talk about accessible units, yes, there's no guarantee they'll be rented, but one way to absolutely guarantee that you won't rent an accessible apartment is to not build it. Right? Like, you have to get it built if you're going to have it occupied. We have to get these things built. And, and it's true that no subsidized housing is proposed, but remember, the town of Saugeen Shores and the county of Bruce are subsidizing housing ourselves, providing rental subsidies. What is the formula for solving the housing crisis? And there is a housing crisis. The formula is build rental apartments and subsidize rents. And that's how we get people into housing. And I'll tell you, I hear from the people who need this housing. I can tell you it is true that they need it, and they can't find places to live in our community. I don't know how we can make that clear, but it is the case. So, so I think we need density. This is one of those places you need higher density. So I am going to support ultimately building higher density in this location. And I am going to support, and I do support an apartment building in this location. But I think I also have sympathy for the question about landscape open space. And I think that there are probably ways for the developer to get some more landscape open space in this location. And I would really like to create an opportunity because I really don't want to see this defeated and end up at the tribunal and having a fight. What I'd like is some sort of solution. So what I would like to suggest is that council do what it would have traditionally done with at a public meeting, that we receive this zoning bylaw amendment and local official plan amendment for information, and that staff be directed to work with the developer and return to council with a recommendation that has considered input from council and the public. Is there any interest in what I have suggested there, the deputy mayor?
I would move that motion.
That's moved by the deputy mayor, seconded by the vice deputy mayor. Any further discussion on that? And does the clerk, I have it written down, but you're clear on it? Okay. Yes, the vice deputy mayor.
I just want to make it clear, and I think I said it when I spoke, I absolutely support intensification. This is called for 24 units. I just wasn't sure whether 24 was slightly too large because of the 18% landscape. But perhaps there's a compromise somewhere. You know, I'd like to see rental units on that property. I understand the concerns of the residents. We have a housing crisis, like it or not. When I chaired the Attainable Housing Task Force, I sat in those rooms with people with tears flowing down their cheeks because they can't find a place to live. I saw people in behind Walmart, homelessness people couldn't find a place to rent. And I'm not saying homeless people are going to end up in this development here, but there's a shortage of rental accommodation. We have to fix it. I'm not sure 24 units is the right amount. I'm not sure the 18% is the right amount. I don't like the 18%. But I think with using that property and the lane with some landscaping and look at the size a little bit, I think there's a solution here. So I do support it, but I just can't support it as it's written tonight. I think the motion that I've seconded to send it back to receive it, I think is a good first step.
Okay, so I appreciate everybody's comments. We've heard from the public, heard from members of council. We have some input. We'll work together and we'll come back with another proposal for council to consider. So you've heard the recommendation. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, so now we are on to 6.2, which I gotta get back to my script here. And that is, all right. So next we have a public meeting for local official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications L 2023-002 and Z 2023-009 for Slola for 570 Johnson Avenue in Port Elgin. The purpose of this public meeting is to learn about the application and to hear from members of the public. First, we'll receive a report from the planning staff. Then we will hear from the applicant or their agents. Then we will hear from any members of the public. Members of the public are advised that the ability to appeal the decision on this application may be limited if you have not provided comments on the application before the decision is made. Comments may be made verbally before the committee or submitted to staff in writing before the bylaw is passed. After we have heard from the public, the committee will discuss and consider a recommendation on this application. So I will now ask the planner on the file to present the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I want to identify that there's a discrepancy between the mapping available in my report. The maps provided show the entire property as one lot. However, the property consists of two independent lots of record. The purpose of the application this evening is to seek a site-specific zoning provision to allow for high-density residential building in the core commercial zone. The amendment would also recognize the deficient exterior side yard and front yard setbacks for the existing single detached dwelling. It would recognize a deficient front yard setback, rear yard setback, and parking for the proposed apartment building. It would also allow for an increase to the site coverage for the proposed building. A local official plan amendment is necessary to increase the maximum permitted density from 90 units per hectare to 153 units. In terms of the planning analysis, it centers around the policies in the Bruce County official plan and the provincial policy statement. The lands are designated primary urban communities in the Bruce County official plan. The provincial policy statement is interested in the vitality and long-term sustainability of settlement areas. The PPS directs that the majority of growth and development should occur in these areas. It encourages development of mixed densities and land uses that make the most efficient use of land and resources. The PPS also encourages intensification and a range of housing types and tenantures for compact development where it can appropriately be accommodated. The goals and objectives of both the county and local official plans direct much of the future growth to primary urban communities such as Port Elgin. The official plan establishes the criteria by which to evaluate proposals for high density development. The proposed development meets all the required criteria. The building is proposed to be 3 stories and should generally complement the neighboring properties. Residential uses in the commercial core zone are limited to accessory dwelling units located above or behind the principal commercial use. The application is to allow a site-specific zoning provision for the 12-unit residential building without any commercial use on the property. In this instance, the applicant is proposing to increase the total lot coverage by 1% for a total of 51%. It's of the opinion of county staff that the front and rear yards on this property are reasonable, and there will be enough permeable surfaces maintained to allow for drainage, amenity space, and green landscaping. Comments of concern were received from the public pertaining to privacy. The development will be subject to site plan control, which is the more appropriate venue by which to deal with issues of landscaping and buffering that may arise. The existing dwelling and the proposed apartment requires that the provision of 17 parking spaces. Cash in lieu of on-site parking will be provided for the town's requirements. The applicant is proposing to utilize 10 of the 17 required parking spaces that currently exist on the road allowance of Waterloo Street. These spots were previously used by the property's bed and breakfast, and the town is amenable to the continuation of the parking. The balance of the parking spaces will be provided on the lots. No comments of concerns were raised from agencies, and no further public comments were received on this application. And this concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I will ask if there are, we will now open the public portion of the meeting, and I will ask if there are any comments from the applicant or their agent. And I think maybe we do have comments, so go ahead. I just turn your mic on there. Yeah. There you go. Oh. There you go.
Hi again, council. I haven't left yet. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. Thanks to Julie for her work on this report. Council, if the proposal looks similar, it's because it is. The preliminary architecturals for both the apartment buildings are the same. So once again, we're talking 4 accessible units on the bottom floor. We're talking 3 stories, 1 to 2 bedroom rental units. The main difference between these applications, because they are very similar, is the existing zoning or the requested zoning that we're asking for. So this the subject lands are located in the core commercial zone, which has a significantly reduced landscape open space requirement of 10%, which we are proposing to meet. It also has maximums for how much you can set the building back and interior side yards. So what we're asking you to do is, because this is proposed to be a residential building, to increase these. So the interior side yard is 0 meters. That means we could build directly up to the lot line should we wish to. We are planning for 1.83 between the severed and the retained, and 1.84 between the severed and adjacent uses. We're also asking for a rear yard minimum decrease from 10 meters to 6.92, and asking for an increase in the front yard. So that would be the maximum is 1.2 meters. We're gonna ask for 3.5, setting that building back a little bit more. I think that was the only things I wanted to highlight. I did believe Julie mentioned they are two existing lots of record, so we're proposing to swap some land between the lots to give a little bit more land to the to the apartment building. The house has an existing frame garage, which the applicant would like to keep. So that's why that's going a little bit that way. The 1 through 17 located along Waterloo Street is an existing parking area that is already paved there. So we are proposing to continue to use that for the parking. The residents will have to walk, but that the applicant will have to pay cash in lieu for those parking spots as well. Happy to answer any questions that council may have. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. And there's no one else on behalf of the applicant? No? Okay, so now we'll move on to members of the public who wish to speak to this file. I know there is one member of the public in the room who wishes to speak to the file. Well, I think there is Kathy Geddes. Is Ms. Geddes wish to speak to this file?
Thank you. I've lived in Port Elgin for 25 years, and prior to that, I lived in Saugeen Township for 19 years. I'm not opposed to infill development, but I would like to see development that is compatible with maintaining or enhancing Southampton, Port Elgin, Saugeen Shores responsible growth. A duplex or even a fourplex on this lot would be compatible with the neighborhood. A 3-story, 12-unit apartment building with 5 or 6 parking spots, only one of which is handicap size, is not compatible. A building so large that unless the lot line is moved, people cannot get in the door. Lot coverage is so dense, there is no space for snow removal, and water runoff is concerning. It's unclear what existing vegetation is being maintained. On-site parking is achieved from a one-way narrow lane. Entering and particularly exiting parking spaces will be very difficult. The narrow lane is also one-way and used as a commercial vehicle unloading area, which limits access. Additional parking is along Waterloo Street. And if you look at the drawings, there is 10 spots along Waterloo. 2 90-degree parking spots in the driveway to the garage maintain the total number of parking spots. These cars are jammed in there. The walking distance from the parking on Waterloo Street to the apartment is not 15 meters, especially if you go up to Johnson Street and using the existing sidewalks as the applicant suggests. Personally, I will no longer see the sunrise or the morning sun, and traffic and noise will greatly increase. I'm opposed to the stated development. It is not compatible with the neighborhood. It appears that profit takes priority over what is best for our town. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there other members of the public here this evening who wish to speak? Yes, ma'am, but once Ms. Geddes has moved there, you come on up and make sure to state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilors, for taking the time to hear us out. My name is Stacey Paganoff. I'm the owner of the Learning Academy in Port Elgin, so we're at 569 Catherine Street. So I believe I share the same sentiments as the previous speakers, both Mrs. Geddes and those that spoke of the other developments. So like I said, I own the Learning Academy, which shares the alley south of the property. The Learning Academy provides childcare for approximately 67 families, as well as tutoring and swimming lessons. I purchased the property to follow my philosophy for the business of providing a natural space, and I just wanted to emulate a home. We completed extensive renovations to maintain the character of the building to provide the least impact to the homes and neighbors in the area. And my concern for this building is the reduction of the open and green space, and most importantly, maintaining the privacy that my current space has. So the building that they're proposing would have direct views of not only our backyard, but the pool, which is used by children who are 0 to 5 years old. There's mention that due to this lot being core commercial, there are reduced setbacks. I would also encourage council to look at the building extension to the Ralph's Plaza that was just completed. That's to the east of our property. It looms over our yard. There's direct views of our pool, and that's already impacting the privacy. So just, adding to that is concerning. Councillor Grace mentioned keeping historic buildings intact and maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. So how would this proposed building fit into that? Especially since there's a historic building right next door. She also mentioned that if it's not for affordable housing, then is it worth adding more when you're removing green space and the charm of the historic buildings that are in the neighborhood? So my points relate to Councillor Davinsky's point about privacy. Will there be windows on our side looking at the pool and the yard with the children outside? And similar to the previous proposal, this will be using a municipal lane for parking. So it is a fire lane, and I have had multiple calls to the police and bylaw about delivery trucks blocking the lane for significant amounts of time. So it's not allowing our parents to pick up the children. And they use it for pickup and drop off and require it to be accessible during business hours. So I think many of my concerns again are green space, privacy, and the use of the municipal lane. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak this application? Yeah. Make sure to state your names for the record when you sit down, please.
Yes, Ken and Cynthia McMillan. We own the property right next door to where this building is gonna go, 582 Johnson Street. And yeah, I was concerned about water runoff, green space too. Is like, I've always thought you had to have so much room for green space for water and stuff to go to build these kind of units. Now, Ken and Sil, they used to own the property. They ran a bed and breakfast. She worked her heart out on that long. Always cutting the grass, and Ken was always building something. Anyways, yes, they sold the property, and and then I heard it was to a developer. So I just thought, okay, well, maybe we're gonna put a house in there. But I never imagined a 12-unit apartment building. Plus, the decks apparently are gonna face towards us. So we're just gonna have like a brick wall to look at. And the parking issue too, on the back of, like with, Ralph having the deliveries, the Pepsi truck, the milk truck, the chocolate place, Mill Creek. It's a busy alleyway as it is. Let alone having more parking and stuff in the back. And that's both all I have to say.
Okay, thank you both very much. Is there anyone else here wishes to speak? There's nobody else in the room, but is there anybody else online who wishes to speak?
No, there aren't.
And are there any written submissions that we have not already seen or discussed?
No.
No. You have something else to add, sir? Well, maybe we can get the planner to comment to that. The planner. Let me see. Okay, well, thanks for that information. If you want to make a point, then come up to the microphone. Folks online won't be able to hear you. So if you miss Ms. Geddes has one more comment to make.
I just wanted to refer to this drawing. And if you look at the apartment building, in order to get to the parking lot, if you're in a wheelchair and you're using one of those wheelchair accessible units, it's going to be tricky to get down that laneway, around the corner from the garage and into the parking lot.
Okay, thank you for that, Getty. So there's nothing else from members of the public in the room, and we don't have anybody else online, then we will close the public portion of the meeting, and we'll move then to considering the recommendation, and then we'll hear questions or comments from members. So there is a recommendation that council adopt local official plan amendment. Am I the right one? Yes, sorry. That council adopt local official plan amendment L 2023-002 as attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to county council for approval, and that committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 2023-009 as attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Questions or comments from members? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And through you, as a point of clarification, is it two separate lots? So it's two separate lots, correct?
We'll ask the representative for the proponent.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have a legal opinion obtained in at the end of my planning report that does confirm that it's two separate lots.
Okay. Well, the reason why I ask is that I can appreciate it's zone central core CC, and the parking situation is a little different, but when you have residential units, it would seem that we would assume that residential units require parking when we're not that forward or ahead of that sort of thing yet to imagine people don't have cars. But I just find it incredible that we would enable something that the parking that's required for that isn't on the lot, it isn't on the next lot, it's on a road allowance. And we just had a conversation about another development where we didn't want to have any access off Bricker Street because it was a collector road. And here we are now pretty much encouraging a whole bunch of access. I understand that the parking spaces were there with the bed and breakfast, but I don't believe they were all used at the same time. But we're now saying that it's okay, and Waterloo Street is just as traveled as a collector as Bricker. So I have a great deal of concern about the way that parking is sort of attributed here, because is it setting up that municipal road allowances and other properties are going to solve parking problems? I would have assumed that a property should deal with its own. So I might have another question further, but that was my first comment, was just about, if it's two lots, why are we enabling something that's required for that scale of residential life? Why are we letting something like that happen again, far enough away that and then on municipal road allowance? Thank you.
Why don't we turn that over to the planner maybe to comment on?
If I may, through you, Mr. Chair. So in the parking in this instance, I understand there's some concern with the road right of way. This parking is within the road right of way, but it's not inhibiting on the lane traffic. It is beside the lane, in which case there's a designated area for that parking. When we see, winter concerns in regards to parking, this would still be able to be utilized all year round in the winter, because although it's in the right of way, it's beside the lanes of traffic.
Okay, so I got Councillor Stack and then help.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of questions, and I think this may surprise some folks in the room, but I actually do have quite a bit of concerns around the way the structure, the plan, particularly to tag on Ms. Getty's point around, well, accessibility, but just and perhaps I'm missing it, but very unclear to me how you access parking adjacent to the buildings. I have just general the logic of flow. So I'm curious if there's some discussions we had, if you can explain. If you can maybe explain kind of how that design came across. And then secondly, and as someone who just has used the Learning Academy in the past, I'm aware of its presence. And I think that's a valid concern. So, there's the privacy issues and just the amount, sort of the combination of traffic at that exact point, between the two lots. I'm just sort of generally interested in how the thought and planning into this particular residence went, because, from my view, you would think that the access point would be from Johnson's. I'm recognizing it's not possible, but it's a bit of an odd construction. And then this is my own ignorance, but so there's a bed and breakfast sign still there. Is there still an operating bed and breakfast? Okay. So we don't have to deal with that, but I'm just curious what the considerations were when the design came, because unlike the other building, from my opinion, which was very clearly constructed and the land provides for that type of structure, I am concerned just the practicality of how you access the building in relation to the parking with a private residence. Like, it's just it doesn't seem like the most logical way to construct. And it does seem in this case like perhaps trying to fit a square into a circle, not because of the density, just the practicality of trying to move parking in the residence.
There's a few questions there. We'll put them to the developer, the representative for the developer.
I think I've got all of them. If I don't answer one, please let me know. Through you again, Mr. Chair. The proposed house is proposed to be a rental house. So it is owned by the developer right now. He is planning to maintain that as a rental house. So a couple things to chat with you about. The zoning bylaw actually allows you to park within 150 meters of the site, but it clearly stipulates that cannot be included in the road allowance. So what we have done here is actually gone ahead and normally I think most of the counselors would be thinking this isn't a normal situation. But what happened is that parking area is already there and its establishment is already there. We're using an established parking area that is paved over already and has been used for parking in the past, which is why his extension was a little bit more of a natural thing in this development. So these 10 spots would be proposed to walk up Johnson into the unit. The 2 spots being 11 and 12 would service the house for their needs. And then these 6 spots behind would be for the apartment building as well. That didn't have most of them, or was there another one?
Don't forget your microphone.
So I'm just and sorry, I know that question was a bit rambling, but was there consideration and again, I know there are properties around town that, you're not within 5 meters of your residence. I think the difference is here, just the practicality of sort of having to go, it looks like, you're going to have to go down an L. So if you're moving or like large volumes of groceries, let's just go with groceries, you have to walk quite a distance.
So we did discuss, or myself with the developer did discuss that taking down that garage and doing parking an L-shaped building, an L-shaped lot across the back. That garage was important to the developer. It is quite new and quite nice, to be honest, for another word. So it was part of the development, his proposed development. So we kept it and are going to pay the cash in lieu for those parking spots. While we're going to park there, we are paying the cash in lieu because they're in their allowance.
Can I ask one more follow-up? So let's just, how many units? Is this 1 or 2 bedroom units? 2. Okay, so let's assume likely most people will have residents, which probably will have 2 cars. So where are the additional cars going to park?
For you, Mr. Chair, it meets the parking provisions, 1.25 per apartment unit.
No, I understand. I just think, again, it's not the end of the world, but practically, I'm just not sure where those additional parking spots would go. In the winter, can you park on Waterloo in the winter? Does anyone know? Right. I think that's the concern there.
Okay, then we'll go to Councillor Halpern. Oh, to Karina Smith, you put your hand up. We'll turn to the planner first.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. The one thing I did want to make a distinction between this site and the one that we heard earlier today is this site is in the core commercial area. And the policies in the official plan do allow for that cash in lieu of on-site parking, which is what is being considered here, even though they are providing the required parking within the road right of way. So should that parking ever, if the town ever needs to expand Waterloo for whatever reason, there is the cash in lieu that would be available for the town to create parking elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Helpin.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. I guess my comments are much the same as with the other building, that this is a place for density. I recognize that. And if you can't do it in the core, where can you? It's just a little bit the size of the building, again, that I would find concerning. And if I were you right next to it, I would feel, you know.
We're going to maintain order, please. But the councillor has the floor. No interruptions from the audience, please. Councillor Helpin.
Thank you. And again, I would encourage that the facade of the building would meet the neighborhood and blend in with the neighborhood. And, you know, those are my main comments right now. It's just, it's a little big, especially for the one side towards the east, to work with something with that and making a facade that fits the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, are there further comments? Councillor Javinsky and then Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, going through deja vu all over again here. And I need to know if this building is going to be a 3-story building, just like the other one was. What kind of guarantees are there, if anything, that is going to allow the people that live nearby privacy and people not staring down at them and so on? It's the same issue we had with the other one. This time it was brought up by our speakers. Is there anything that is, have you taken this into consideration? Because boy, if I was a neighbor and had a swimming pool, I think somebody said they had a swimming pool. Boy, I'd be concerned. I'd be a little ticked off that this is going to be there. And people can just sit and watch. I don't know why they want to, but they could. Can you give me some, is the developer aware of this, and are you prepared to do something to mitigate this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. So once again, we can do screening, we can do landscaping, we can do fencing through site plan control. The municipality can set requirements for that. I would also make the comment that in a 2-story house, you could theoretically look in your neighbor's backyard as well. The screening is going to provide insulation for that, but it's an angles thing too, right? You're going to be able to see down. Don't know if we can cover vertically. I can go. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, but you said the 2-story house, and they could look down. Well, that doesn't make it right. You're right, that could happen, but it doesn't make it right. And we have an opportunity here, I think, to correct an issue that may be lingering. And as you said, it's probably down the road to site plan control. But sometimes when you get to site plan control, it's too late. Because the thing is built and you're just going to continue on. So I find this very disconcerting. I understand fully, Mr. Mayor, that you can't be building buildings like this throughout the town and not run into that problem. I understand that. But if we can mitigate it in any shape or form with a couple of changes, and I don't even know what those changes would be. then I would say go for it. Anyway. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just to clarify, and you may have misspoken there, Counselor, but like site plan control will occur before the facility is, or the new building is constructed. Site plan control won't come after, it'll be before, so it will control the construction and what it looks like, et cetera, et cetera.
My apologies for leaving that impression, and thank you for the correction.
Nope, just didn't want anybody out there to be confused. So I have Counselor Grace and then Counselor Maya.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a question about the cash in lieu contribution or payment. What is that amount? And how is it calculated per space as a one-time payment?
Go to the supervisor development services for that.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, the amount is approximately 2,500. It is done by bylaw that was done in about 2010 and is indexed annually. So depending on the timing of the payment, it's adjusted. And it is paid per space.
So it's paid annually.
No, it's but one-time payment. I see what you're
One-time
saying,
payment.
one-time payment.
Okay.
And it goes into a parking reserve, which is the town maintains and uses at its discretion to provide parking.
And one more question, please. The density that's proposed is 153 units per hectare, up from the maximum allowed, which is 90. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Is that density calculated based on both lots or the one that it's going to be mainly occupying this apartment building?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is the density for the apartment building only. The other house has a much lower density, being just one unit on that parcel.
Okay, so I think you mentioned that you were intending to be using a little bit of the other lot. Was that taken into the calculation as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
Thank you.
So I have Counselor Maya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my initial look at this, I thought this was a good idea. This is exactly what we've been asking our developers to come up with. This is a piece of property, which is an oversized lot, and it's as close to downtown as you can get. I likened it to the recent development one block over, where they put an innovative use of space and made a number of smaller apartment units. I think that other than the density, slight density change in the side yard setbacks, I think it's good use of planning. And I think if we continue to ask developers to come up with innovative ways to do infill and intensification, and then we balk at the opportunities, then I think we're not going to get very many prospects coming forward. So I like this one, and it's only 3 stories. It's not like we're putting a 10-story building there. It fits within the zoning for vertical. It was pointed out by somebody that we have houses that are as tall as this in our community. So that's just my thoughts on it. Thank you.
So I have the deputy mayor, then I'll come back to Davinsky.
Excuse me, thank you, and through you. So just to clarify, the cash in lieu is $2,500 per space, so that's $25,000. Would that be fair?
Approximately.
Okay, and it's in perpetuity.
So they pay the one time and they get to use this spaces in perpetuity until, as it was described, that we would have a reason to upgrade Waterloo Street, and then they would have to try to find parking in another way.
Is that written right into whatever agreement?
We'll need to consider it in our site plan agreement about how to implement it. We're a little ways away from that, so we haven't quite got the mechanism, but that's what it'll be probably the best tool to use.
The reason why I ask is that, it's fine to say that there are 10 spaces there currently, but there has been a change of use on the lot. It's no longer a bed and breakfast. It was mentioned it's going to become a rental unit. I've been in that house a few times. I don't know if you can get two rental units in there. It's more likely one. So technically Pardon?
We won't have, let's not have exchanges between the council and the gallery.
It's a change of use on the property and often when there's a change of use, that's when we correct some deficiencies. So I'm very concerned about, giving up road allowances for parking in such a significant way. Already in Southampton, there's issues with a newer development where there's cars constantly parked over the sidewalks because they're using the road allowance to take care of parking for the units. There is one though that was built a couple of years ago, or it was we had a planning application that required a change. It was at the corner of Morpeth and Grosvenor in Southampton, and I remember distinctly that we forced the parking back so that technically there was no parking on the road allowance, and that's a fairly large size unit too. I'm very cautious about this because is it setting a precedent? Maybe, maybe not. But it just seems like this is a very busy street and the time to perhaps correct something related to parking in terms of all of that in and out onto that road is when there's a change of use, and there's a change of use here. I don't know how you get more parking onto the lot that's being severed for this apartment building. And I agree, this is where we should have some density happen. It's a great location for that. But I still believe that the lot should take care of itself. And I'm very hesitant about giving up public property for $25,000 in perpetuity. Thank you.
Is your hand up, Councillor Grace? I have Councillor, I have it up on the screen. So I'll go to the Vice Deputy Mayor, he hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Davinsky, okay?
Parking really was my main concern with this development and, I suppose going from 12 units to 8 units, it would help fix that problem. I'm just wondering, the lane to the planner. How many cars will be traveling across that lane to access parking on a daily basis? I'm just not quite understanding the map.
Who wants to take that one?
Sorry, Council, was that to me? or
Anyone
to-
would like to answer it.
Okay.
It
I'm
can be
happy
to you.
answer it. Through you,
Sure,
Mr.
go
Chair.
ahead.
Sorry. So spots 11 and 12, do you have a site plan in front of you, Council? Spots 11 and 12
Right,
and 1 through 6 would front onto the lane. That helps.
so eight parking spots will have to travel across that lane to get to the units, correct? So the other question I have, and whether it's to the county planner Jay perhaps, but our lanes, and there's a lot of lanes in Saugeen Shores. Do we have similar situations, Jay, where people have to, and in this case, they're gonna have to go down that lane to access that parking? I'm not sure if municipal lane should use that purpose or not. Maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be. But are there other situations, Jay, where we're traveling across these lanes to access parking for the housing, for the houses that they live in, or they access them on the main road like Johnson, Waterloo, et cetera? Is there other situations the same?
If you're asking me directly, yes. And in fact, from this developer, we worked on a project on Catherine Street north of Maple Square Mall where the parking was accessed via the lane at the back and only via the lane at the back.
North of Maple Square Mall. Is that Dean Butner?
Yes,
Dean Butner,
he's a part owner of this property as well.
oh, I see.
I think the applicant has a comment.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe the property that's directly adjacent to this one access has at least vehicular traffic. They park at the back of their lot.
What's happening elsewhere?
Yeah.
I see that the planner has her hand up too. Karina, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. The other thing I wanted to highlight for this committee's consideration is that there are policies in the local official plan that would direct street access away from the arterial roads, such as Waterloo Street or Bricker Street, and direct it to the local roads, which then provides less impact to traffic. And so access to the lane or to a local road is the preferred option, which is provided in this case.
Well, the local road, can that be also classified as a lane, as you're saying?
Yes, that is correct.
That's the same one and the same? And that's in our official plan, they're saying.
That's correct.
Thank you, that helps a lot.
Did you have a comment, Councillor Grace?
Yes, thank you. So once again, the issue of parking along Waterloo Street. A busy street, as it's been pointed out, and I like what the deputy mayor said about the $25,000 charge in perpetuity at this point, and the fact that just because this has been done this way in the past, that when there's a change in use or ownership, then this may be an opportunity to reevaluate that parking solution that was used in the past. I have a concern about, it hasn't really been raised, but to me, a practical concern about all of those people parking there and backing out onto a busy street of Waterloo. I mean, just they're using the road allowance parking vertically, not parking vertically into the property. From what I can see, that looks like what the use would be, as opposed to parking laterally, as we see very often in the way our road allowances are used for parking. So it's a consideration that I have a concern about too, in terms of safety of backing out onto Waterloo.
Yeah, I'm going to come to Councilor Davinsky now. Sorry, Councilor Davinsky, I've been pushing you down the order. Councilor Davinsky.
I thought I did something bad. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. A question I forgot, and I think I know the answer already. Are there any plans for affordable units in this development?
At this time, no, and in a rent to geared income type of way. They are, again, very likely going to be more attainable and at a less price point than several units that are located in the town right now.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll make a couple of comments now. I am struggling because I really want to like this development, and because I agree with Councilor Mayette that it's the kind of development that we want to see in the place we want to see it. It's just, I struggle with the zoning that's being proposed. You're kind of shoehorning this thing into the core commercial zone, but it isn't really a core commercial development, right? In core commercial, the residential is supposed to be accessory to the commercial. And now you're completely eliminating the commercial use. Unless I'm wrong, I don't think any commercials proposed, right? This is 100% residential. And the reason that, and I don't mean to cast aspersions, but I suspect the reason why you're leaving it core commercial is because of that parking provision, right? You're taking and sticking a completely residential development in a zone where it doesn't really belong, leaving it in that zone just because that zone doesn't require parking. And so the thing is out of sync. Like, it doesn't really work, right? This really ought to, if we're going to have a development like this, ought to have a residential zone, because it is purely residential, perhaps a high, R4 and R3 zone. But then that would require the parking to be handled on site. And see, I worry, like I look at the parking situation as Councilor Grace raised, and I only just have to look down the street to Market and Waterloo Street to see a very similar development on there that forced us to put in a four-way stop there because of the negative interactions between traffic backing out of those spaces. Very similar circumstance, very similar. And it was widely recognized. We had delegations here at this council about the danger of that intersection. This council years ago added this four-way stop in that location to try to make it safer, but we don't want to make it so safe. And it got to it's not a development, that one, that I have often said to myself, I wouldn't have voted to do that in that location because of that. And so I worry, I see a replication here, and I see the deputy mayor's point about, you have an opportunity in a rezoning to correct an issue. It's an existing issue. What the applicant has said is quite right. That parking lot is there today, but it's not used as much. And what we can do as a municipality, when the applicants come to us looking to do things, is we can fix problems that may have existed, right? So it's an opportunity for us to lever a change that we can hope will improve our road. So I have these issues. It's not, and like I say, I like the development. Like I like the idea of a higher density development there. I like having all those units. I don't have trouble with the height, but I do have a problem with the proposed zone. Maybe the planner could allay my fears on the zone thing. Like I just don't quite get what you've done there. And this parking situation, which to me looks an awful lot like other problems that we have. So I see the developer wishes to speak, and I'll also ask the planner to speak to it. So we'll start with the developer.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The, each property is designated in the official plan as something, and then it's zoned as something, right? The official plan in the core commercial area permits only high density apartments. They are a permitted use. We are not obtaining a new designation. It encourages, as many of you said, that's where you want your high density development. So the official plan has directed it as such. As I noted in my planning report, the zone does not correspondingly permit an apartment. It's permitted use in the official plan. It's not a permitted use in the zoning bylaw. And what it does is require all of the developments to go through a zoning bylaw amendment to permit an apartment. So in your visioning document being your official plan, you envision apartments being in your core commercial designation. That doesn't follow through to your zoning bylaw, which is why I'm sitting in front of you today. I did actually have a conversation with Mr. Posner and Ms. Smith, offering to put it in an R4 zone and asked what their preference was. And the preference was to leave it in a core commercial zone.
Sure, and that's why I was hoping to hear from the planner. So maybe the planner could enlighten us further.
Sure, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So the one thing I will highlight is that the parking requirements, regardless of the zone, it speaks to the building type. So for an apartment, it is 1.25 parking spaces per unit. And so that would apply whether it was an R4 or the current zoning on the property, the commercial core. With respect to the zoning, we did have that pre-consultation discussion and felt that it was appropriate to keep it in that core commercial zone. It could have went the other way as well. Either option was we felt appropriate in this instance. I don't know if there's further that you want me to highlight in that regard.
So you're saying that I'm wrong, that in the core commercial zone, the applicant isn't the development isn't required to have parking on site, and in the R4 zone, they are. I mean, that's my conception that the core commercial zone permits the development to occur and essentially conceives that the municipality will provide parking for that, for all of the development in the core commercial zone. And the residential zones require parking to be provided on site. Am I wrong about that?
So we'll maybe make a distinction between the local official plan policies. So the local official plan does allow for the cash in lieu option in the core commercial designation. The bylaw hasn't quite caught up to the official plan. And so that requires the specifications for parking is based on building type. So this would be an apartment building, and it does require 1.25 units, or sorry, spaces per unit.
If I could add on, the parking requirements would be the same in an R4 zone or a PC zone.
So, all right. I guess I'm lost, and you're asking, I didn't see, and maybe I'm just behind the 8 ball here, but I didn't see in the draft bylaw a requirement, a condition that would exempt you from that requirement, from a parking requirement. Is it there?
Yep, 2.V5. The minimum number of on-site parking slots shall be no less than 5.
Okay, so 5 is the required number.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you would exempt it through the bylaw to, that's what we'd have to provide.
Okay, that's fine then, and I still have my concern about that, about the location of the parking. I'm not, suppose at this point, it's just a concern. The deputy mayor.
Thank you. As a point of clarification, did I hear you just say that for commercial, the zoning enables apartment buildings? Is that what you said?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the official plan.
Okay, because the zoning bylaw does not.
It would be worth asking the planner. I mean, so what the developer is, the representative of the developer is contending is that the zoning bylaw does not comply with the official plan as written. Is that the opinion of the planning staff on this point, that the zoning bylaw as written is out of compliance with the plan?
So that's through you, Mr. Chair. So the local official plan does allow for a high density residential in the core commercial designation. So it does allow for that use, but through it needs to be implemented through a zoning bylaw amendment. Which is
So,
what.
so as written, the zoning bylaw does not comply with the bylaw, with the
That's
official
correct.
plan. Okay. That clarifies that, Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just, when I spoke earlier, I talked about parking is my major concern with this development. And I was listening to what our deputy mayor had to say, and I listened to you and Councillor Grace, and listened to you to say we have concerns. And Market Street in Waterloo, I remember that discussion around that four-way stop, and that's not a great intersection. People backing out onto Waterloo. So Deputy Mayor said, well, maybe this is an opportunity with the zoning change to force the parking onto the land and get it off of Waterloo. So, I guess I'm taking what Deputy Mayor's saying, what you're saying, what Councilor Grace is saying. I like the idea of 12 units, high density, downtown commercial area, walkability. I don't know. Parking, said right at the beginning when I spoke, is parking is a concern. I think backing on to Waterloo, that's a very busy road. And are we creating another risk factor, dangerous situation? 10 spots backing on the Waterloo, so I kind of agree with Councilor Grace. Deputy Mayor. So I don't know. Are we creating a risk, more of a risk?
Let me just, because I'm still lost, and it must be because it's late or I'm not very smart, probably both. I'm still lost on this parking thing. So the bylaw, and I see that point in here, and I guess this was where I was misunderstanding, because I did see that point. The minimum number of on-site parking spots should be no less than 5, but that isn't 1.25 per unit. That's less than the requirement. The rest is being provided off-site on our property, right? Which is so. Like, I just don't see how. You shouldn't, like, I just did the wording, but maybe it's the problem. My problem is with the wording of the amendment, that there needs to be some, doesn't there, I'll put this to the planner, doesn't there have to be some, don't we have to provide some relief to the basic 1.25 spots per unit? Like, I don't see us providing that relief in here. Shouldn't we need to? Or is it to supervised development services?
Yeah, and I think I was just going to pause, I guess, to say two things. I'm maybe getting a sense of where this is heading, and Julie will make sure in her next report to provide a fulsome clarification, because I'm not sure what I'm about to say will be able to untie it. But the idea is you have tools at your disposal authorized under the Planning Act, and that you've got in your zoning bylaw and your cash in lieu of parking bylaw that allow you to make decisions about these things when it makes sense to the community. The bylaw is drafted requires the minimum of 5 to be provided as it's written. Any additional ones that need to be provided per the zoning bylaw, you can deal with through the existing cash in lieu parking bylaw. You don't need to mention it because it exists already. And that would be the tool we're proposing this development be used with.
But the only reason the cash in lieu of parking option exists is because it's the core commercial zone.
Correct.
So it comes back to my point, right?
Yeah, I do want to clear. It's because of its location, not necessarily the zone. So it's applied in the downtown area.
Okay.
And the zoning bylaw already exempts commercial development. So if you build a retail store downtown, you don't have to provide parking. You don't even need to provide cash in lieu of that parking. We have other tools to do that too. In this case, because they're doing residential, we expect and understand the demand for parking. We have this tool called cash in lieu parking that we can use when it makes sense.
Okay, I would appreciate that more fulsome explanation. Clearly I need it, and you guys are smarter than me. So I'll accept what you're saying is right. Okay, so we'll do a lightning round. I suspect, just before I go to folks, I suspect we're heading in a similar direction as the last time on this thing. So I suspect what we'll end up doing is receiving this information, sending it back for some consideration based on what's been said. So I'm prepared to do that on this case as well. But if there's final comments quickly, then let's have them. Councillor Halpin.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just a rough calculation. If you lost that garage and you did lane parking rather than parallel, you could have 12 or even more spots. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, the deputy mayor.
I just did through you a quick look at the zoning stuff and where the bed and breakfast is, where that structure is, it was rezoned to CC6. So it has some very specific stuff in it about side yard setbacks and whatever. Are we making sure that we're maintaining all of that? Because there was very specific stuff required when that went over to being permitting the use of the single family and the bed and breakfast. So I'm thinking that it has, but certainly, there were some very specific things in there that, if they're not going to be maintained, they should be addressed as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there further comments? Let me just quickly put the resolution here. Vice Deputy Mayor.
Well, I move that motion similar to the Mill Street motion that we
Let me
passed
just-
earlier, Mr. Mayor. So if you're reading it out,
Let me just read it here.
I know, I would move it.
Yep, okay, so moved by the Vice Deputy Mayor that zoning bylaw amendment Z 2023-009 and local official plan amendment L 2023-002 be received for information. That staff be directed to work with the developer and return to council with a recommendation that is considered input from council and the public. As their seconder, seconded by Grace. There's nothing further. And all in favor. That's carried. Okay. Anybody need a break at this point? Why don't we take 10 minutes? We'll come back at 22 minutes after 9. Are we ready to pull this thing back together? Councilor Duhane, yeah, is there? All right. So we're on to item 6.3, which is our final public meeting. And it is on zoning bylaw amendment Z 2022-126. Saugeen Shores Housekeeping. This is a public meeting under the Planning Act, and the meeting on the file is now open. The purpose of the public meeting is to learn about the application and to hear from members of the public. First, we will receive a report from planning staff. Then we will hear from the applicant or their agents. Then we will hear from any members of the public. Members of the public are advised that the ability to appeal the decision on this application may be limited if you have not provided comments on the application before the decision is made. Comments may be made verbally before the committee or submitted to staff in writing before the bylaw is passed. After we've heard from the public, the committee will discuss and consider a recommendation on this application. And so now I'll turn it over to the planner to present the application.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So I am presenting the housekeeping amendment to the town of Saugeen Shores zoning bylaw. The applicant, of course, is the town, and this would apply across the town. Next slide. So there are multiple amendments proposed as part of this housekeeping exercise. The first would be the removal of some holding symbol provisions related to specified lots and areas within the town. And that's just cleaning up areas where development has occurred and that holding provision is no longer required for those particular areas. There are also amendments proposed to various provisions within the bylaw itself, some of it relating to the definitions, others relating to setbacks and heights. There's also changes to lot area for undersized agricultural lot. And there's various other provisions that are proposed for amendment. And the intent of that is really to provide clarity and consistency in interpretation of the bylaw. The side effect or resulting from that, it may reduce the number of applications that we do see, or at least the number of joint applications with other files that are processed through the county's offices. Next slide. So we did circulate this out broadly to various departments and agencies. We did receive feedback from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. And as you would see in your report, they did provide feedback and some concern that if the housekeeping amendment does in fact reduce the number of applications that they may see, this reduces what they would term as a trigger opportunity to determine whether or not archaeological assessment is required. So we did provide some response to that in the report. We have also reached back out to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Environment Office, looking to have further discussion with them on that. We also did receive comments from the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, who had suggested additional verbiage on one of the proposed amendments. And we also received no objections from the Bruce County Transportation Department, the municipality of Brockton. And just for clarity on that, we do circulate to all abutting municipalities, which is why Brockton had provided a comment back on this particular application. And Kincardin's like, can we do that too? So they would like to do a housekeeping amendment now as well. The Bruce Grey Catholic District School Board also did provide no objections to the application. We did not receive any public comments on this particular application. Next slide. And so as a recap, these are housekeeping amendments to provide greater clarity and consistency interpretation to the bylaw. And the amendment is also proposing the removal of a holding symbol. So you will see that in your package as two separate bylaws, one for the holding removals and one for the housekeeping amendments. The holding removals are not subject to appeal, whereas the housekeeping amendments would be subject to the appeal period. That concludes my recommendation. This report is only for your information this evening, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'll ask if the applicant has any comments. Jay, do you have any comments? No? All right, so no comments from the applicant, which is down Saugeen Shores. And so there are no other members of the public here to speak to this evening. There are no members of the public online.
No, there are not.
There's no additional written submissions that we haven't already discussed.
No.
Okay, so that will conclude the public portion of the meeting, and we will I'll read the recommendation. It is recommended that zoning bylaw amendment Z 2022-126 be received for information. And so we'll open the floor to questions from members. Start with Stack, then the deputy mayor, then Grace.
I'm going to take the feedback from my colleagues and try and speak directly into the microphone for the entire discussion. So just a couple of quick questions. So, and some of this may just be my sort of, I'll use the continue to be new to the process for a few more weeks. So just regarding the removal of the holding status on certain listed properties, when I was reviewing the materials, it looks like there was some concern about impact on future archaeological assessments. And given some of the discussions we've had earlier today, can you just confirm or clarify for me that the removal of the H designation will only apply to those listed properties and have no impact on future assessment or archaeological assessment requirements going forward? Yes, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Chair. The holding removals development is substantially completed on each of those properties, and so it would apply to those 4 sites or areas specifically. Thank you. And then the next question was on revision to section 3.1.6 sub B. I'm curious why we're considering and again, this may be my ignorance on this point, but why we're allowing boathouses on water properties. I thought there was restrictions on such structures under either provincial or federal law. I'm open to being incorrect there. My real concern there is I thought most of the beaches in the area were public, so I'm just a bit concerned with putting a boathouse on property on a beachfront. And particularly with, I don't want it to be a further means by which we dissuade the public from using public beaches. Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So the current bylaw as it's written does allow for boathouses and that would be on private property fronting onto a waterfront area. The intent would be that other pieces of legislation would continue to apply. For example, the Conservation Authority may require a permit for that area and they would address the tests under their regulation as applicable. Sorry, thank you. Clarification question. So if you have here like Lake Huron beachfront, are you permitted to construct any type of structure on the beach? My understanding, but I'd maybe look to Jay for clarification, is most of the properties that do front on to Lake Huron, there is a municipal right of way or of some sort that is abutting that. And so it wouldn't be private property directly adjacent to Lake Huron, but I'm sure there's examples of other areas.
There are a few, there's not many, but certainly there is, and in the riverine, Saugeen River, Mill Creek, there may be opportunities. And I think the idea is that if the zoning bylaw allows structures, in some cases there are, in the case of the EP zone, it allows non-habitable structures. If they can be permitted and under all legislation, we were just going to continue the same provision that exists.
Sorry, I had one more question that I may have to come back because I can't seem to get my computer to open.
Okay, well, we can come back around to you. Or do you have it?
I have it.
Okay, good.
All right. So thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. And then the last question was on section 3.35 F or sub F. Again, it's more for information than a question. I note we're not restricting encroachments for generators and AC units. I was just a bit surprised by that, given that sometimes the sounds of either an AC unit or a generator can affect or impact the quiet enjoyment of the adjacent properties. So was that sort of was that an existing permission and we're just clarifying, or was this a new clarification? Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So that is a clarification to how it's applied in the case of generators and air conditioners. I did seek further clarification from town staff today, and my understanding is that other bylaws would apply as it relates to nuisance issues like noise. And so it would be covered in another bylaw and doesn't necessarily need to be duplicated in this bylaw. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I have the deputy mayor next and then Grace.
I have questions about 2. One is section 3.21. I just, the proposed wording, I find it a bit confusing to me. So I just was wondering if you might give an example It reads, in the case of a rezoning or severance, permitted and legally established existing buildings or structures or driveways shall be deemed to comply with any applicable zone provisions. That makes sense to me, except parking and loading requirements resulting from such rezoning or severance. Can you just, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but is there an example that you can give me of what that really means?
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll use an example of a residential property in Port Elgin. If they had a large lot that they were looking to sever that had an existing home on it, but they were looking to sever to create a vacant lot for future development. That existing home, if it was a historical home built before the current zoning bylaw, may not comply with the setback requirements. As soon as you sever that lot, it breaks its legal non-conforming status. And so what we've done more recently is have them either go through a zoning bylaw amendment in addition to the consent, the severance application, or a minor variance. And so that would eliminate the requirement for that joint application. So they would essentially recognize that a historical structure and its existing setbacks. But if they were deficient on, for example, parking, they would need to ensure that they can provide that on the site.
Thank you. And the other one I wanted to ask about was section 3.2411A. It relates to the parking of recreational vehicles, travel trailers and boats. And it seems to me that we're changing things. It used to be that they could be parked under certain conditions in residential zones, but now it's kind of removing this specification about the residential zone, and it just seems to be across the board. But it is no longer, there's no longer date restrictions or time restrictions there. And it's very specific about maybe parked or stored. There's a couple of spots where it almost appears as though people are starting to live in trailers, big RV trailers. We're not enabling that. Parking and storing is not living. Is that correct?
That would be correct. Yes.
And and what we're doing here is we're basically saying that anywhere in the community, and you know, for any length of time, as long as it's in the right spot, it's okay now. Is that the gist of this?
Yes, that would be correct through you, Mr. Chair. It does provide clarity for enforcement purposes, particularly.
Thank you, Councilor Grace. And then the Vice Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll just continue on with the section 3.24 11A. And my question is about the proposed change, the first number there. That a recreational vehicle, travel trailer, or boat may be parked or stored within a building or other lawful covered structure. So I've seen a number of those almost sort of tent-like structures that look like longhouses. You know, they're sort of canvas car cover. What? Yes. Are those included in this lawful covered structure definition?
My understanding is that temporary covered structure would be permitted as long as it meets the requirements of the bylaw, but we can certainly take that back to the building officials to confirm.
So where would that be described in the bylaw?
I'd have to check the definitions. I'm not sure if that definition currently exists, so we can look at that and bring that back in a future report.
Okay, thank you. My other question is really related to the discussion we had about the core commercial zone tonight and the fact that our zoning bylaw seems to be in conflict with the local official plan. That whole issue about high density residential and what's permitted. Is that something that we should be adding to this housekeeping list?
Enterprise Development Services.
Yeah, sure. I actually don't think the bylaw is in conflict in the OP. There's certainly many ways to implement the official plan, and that you choose to do site-specific amendments is but one path to do that. So at this time, we didn't feel an amendment to build in apartments in the downtown was appropriate without doing further planning analysis. And there's two reasons for that. One is we did a blanket commercial core zone that allowed apartments. Then conceivably every building could convert to that, and your downtown is obliterated. So we have to be a little more, I think, judicious in the application of that. And the second is that because if we've learned almost every single one of these projects, because they're infill, require very unique, contextually specific ways of developing them. As much as staff supported these two that came forward, it's obvious from the discussion that they're very sensitive and they very need a very much different approach than just building it in as a blanket.
Thank you.
You, Councilor, oh, so we'll get Vice Deputy Mayor and then
Thank
Councilor.
you,
Myatt.
Mr. Mayor. And it just, Councillor Stack, I just want to mention that about the boat, about the boat buildings, storage buildings, that we just removed one of those buildings on Saugeen Beach Road. There was a rezoning, I think it was a minor variance application. And at that time, before we approved the variance, they had to remove the boathouse off of the shore road allowance. So those boathouses are not permitted on shore road allowance. They have to be built on their own property, but we just went through that not long ago. Pardon my voice. The other thing I wanted to mention about the house trailers is that when I read 3.2.4 recreational vehicle, travel trailer, or boat, does that include a trailer that's towed behind a truck, for example, and parked on a building lot and can remain on that building lot for a period of time? Is there a period of time where it has to be removed? I think, could you clarify that? Like, can a trailer remain on a building lot for 10 years if no other structures on that lot? Is there a time restriction?
If that's directed towards me, Mr. Mayor, I'd say no, that the intention is that these are ancillary uses to permitted uses. So if it's a vacant property, there's no establishment of a permitted use, so you shouldn't permit the parking of these trailers. If that's the hypothetical you're creating.
They're not permitted, correct? Or they're permitted for maybe a year or two, but they have to be removed over a period of time, Jay?
Yeah, we have some case law that indicates the semi-permanent or permanent use of trailers is actually basically deemed to be a structure, and you can regulate them through the zoning bylaw and your normal zoning bylaws. So this provision sort of isn't even applicable in those long-term situations. So this one is definitely and as much and intended to be applied to someone that has a house. They just want to park their RV for the winter or throughout the summer. That's the intent.
The intent's not for a vacant lot.
Correct.
To put a trailer on that. There's a situation in Saugeen Beach Road, there was a trailer on a lot for 3 years. And I think since the bylaw enforcement officer said, hey, you got to move it along. But in the zoning bylaw, is there a restriction for that kind of thing then, Jay, elsewhere that I'm not reading somewhere?
Yeah, in the
with time sensitive?
If I can just, time sensitive, we definitely have restrictions on we don't allow the temporary use of construction trailers or any other mobile trailer as a structure or a home or any other non-permitted use.
Okay. Councilor Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just one question and regarding let's see, the part about the agricultural minimum sizes, number P of 75-007, section 3.1.6 Papa. The very bottom of page 2 of 3. It says replacing 0.8 hectares with 4 hectares, which is from the presentation is referring to the amend the minimum size for an agricultural lot, an undersized agricultural lot. So are we saying that currently an undersized agricultural lot can be anywhere over 0.8 hectares, and that the new provision will make it has to be at least 4 hectares?
The planner?
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So currently an undersized lot and the policies that apply to or provisions that apply to that in terms of setbacks, lot area and frontage would apply if you have a lot that's 0.8 hectares or less. So the intent of this amendment is to increase that to 4 hectares because we do have several undersized lots or smaller lots that would not meet the traditional size of an agricultural parcel. So 40 hectares for an example. And so the intent is to recognize that there are lots that are undersized throughout the community where the full setback requirements for an agricultural lot would not apply. So this just allows for a broadening of that, recognizing that we still do want to keep a cap on that to 4 hectares.
So if a person had a lot that was 3 hectares, they wouldn't be subject to the setbacks that would be applicable to a 40-hectare lot.
That's correct.
And that's previous to these changes, that was you had to be under 0.8 hectare.
Yes,
So
that's correct.
basically about 1.5 acres. Now it's under 10 acres. So we're increasing the size. Okay, that's good. I like that.
Mhm. It is good. Are there any further comments? I guess the only thing I'll just note and on that, the question of the RVs and sorry, I'm just trying to get my way back down the line. This thing's gonna start flashing. I mean, it always does about this point in the night because it wants me to stop talking. On the question of the recreational vehicles, travel trailers and boats. I mean, it's a pretty major revision, right? Like to me, that's the one that's sort of the most significant, right? Goes from, we're basically making a change from, because the current zoning bylaw prohibits the parking of those vehicles, and now we're allowing it. So I mean, it's a little bit more than housekeeping, right? Like it's a pretty significant change. Policy wise, within the zoning bylaw, not that I oppose it, but it's I would call that a pretty significant alteration to our policies. I just wonder what background work has been done that drives that change? What has initiated the town to decide to take that step at this point?
Yeah, a few factors. One is we did a sort of a environmental scan, looked at peer municipalities, and they don't share a similar way. At least they don't regulate it through the zoning bylaw. Second is the sort of the nature that original provision was created was because there was other places to store these things on a regular basis, but times change and more people have them. And there was a sort of internal assessment that, well, why shouldn't they be able to keep them on their property? It's just like a vehicle, just bigger. And so as long as they're compliant with these provisions, we felt it, why put a time restriction on it? And then the final is, as Karina already mentioned, enforcement wise, trying to enforce something with specific dates, like between May and September, only 6 days in a row, is not very easy, especially not in a zoning bylaw, which you can't levy fines with a ticket. You have to go through court. It just doesn't make sense on that basis.
No, I appreciate you doing the work to try to relax restrictions in this bylaw and restrict fewer things in these bylaws. I think these bylaws are very often overly burdened with regulations that we can't enforce or don't enforce, and that are probably unnecessary. So I think I just wanted to express my appreciation of taking that initiative and trying to thin this bylaw out as much as possible. So thanks for helping.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Forgive me if this question has been answered, but would this apply to like a work trailer? Like I have a work trailer that I use for dump runs, etc. Would the same apply for something like that? A utility trailer would be a good word to describe it. Thank you.
For this provision for parking purposes, no, those sorts of trailers are not anticipated by this provision. We do prohibit construction trailers in other sections, but a construction trailer, as our zoning bylaw outlines, is more of a semi-permanent structure crews can operate and work in. You mean, as you said, utility, like a flatbed someone takes to the dump run every other weekend. Yeah, this isn't regulating that. To me, that's regulated. That should be treated as just a normal everyday vehicle use, which would be permitted in your parking already.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else? I don't see anything else, so we'll go on to well, you've already heard the question. It's to receive more information. Those are a mover and seconder for that. Moved by Stack, seconded by Davinsky. All in favor? That's carried. Okay. So now we're on to 7.2 reports, and 7.2.1 is a staff report on a subdivision agreement and site plan review, Northport Meadows Phase 2 and Supervisor Development Services.
Okay, so this one you should recognize from a recent meeting where we brought the pre-servicing agreement. Well, we've now worked on the subdivision agreement and more site plan information and seeking approval on the subdivision agreement as outlined in the report. For site plan to receive any comments we might receive from council before staff consider its delegated authority. So on the subdivision, I just want to draw attention to the top of the second page where there's special conditions or special things being implemented through this development, is that Waterloo Street is being provided as a potential future connection to the south, so that as we've long been talking about with Northport School, a way of connecting Waterloo Street. A contribution of 32,000+ as cash in lieu parkland dedication on the basis that there was no parkland identified during the subdivision and the recent red line revision done about 8 months ago, and because there is parkland in the vicinity that does meet our requirements and could be future developed as parkland, that the developer provide 10 additional ARUs in single detached dwelling lots. So that's the 42 lots that are shown. And then finally, there are 249 apartment units that segue right into the site plan. And so we worked on this development. I've shown the draft landscaping plan for your information and a facade, and I think they've done a job that satisfies our requirements. I do note that Accessibility Committee has not had an opportunity to hear the site plan, and so before this development is approved, we want to get their advice on whether there's additional concerns that could be integrated in the site plan. So I'll leave it there for your discussion.
Thank you. So there is a recommendation that council pass a bylaw to authorize the subdivision agreement with Berry's Construction and Installation Limited for Phase 2 of the Northport Meadows subdivision. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is a good news story for our community, and certainly I'll be supporting this recommendation and bringing a lot of new rental units into our community. I am concerned, have been concerned about the cash in lieu contribution. Anytime there's cash in lieu contribution, I'm not sure we should be doing that in favor of giving up land. However, there is a meter park right next door, and I'm going to repeat it. I've said it 2 or 3 times. There has to be, in my view, a park at Beaner. Those diamonds are going to be removed because they're going to be moved out to Lamont Sports Park. So those diamonds are going to disappear. And what's going to happen to that land, we don't know yet. But I just want to go on the record again by saying that that area is deficient with parkland. So I know staff have made note of that, and I hope whatever happens to Beaner lands, that there's provisions to have a park space in there. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll get Councilor Mayette, then Helpin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to this development and others in the vicinity, of course, it is good news that we're adding so many units. I've received it's when you have infill between other subdivisions and a large construction project gets underway. I've received feedback from a number of people that live in the proximity where they have to put up with all the garbage that blows off the site, the styrofoam and the wrappers from the insulation and all that. How much influence can we have, or is it possible to make comment to the developers that apparently at one point in time, some of the sites would put a garbage bin there that, if something blew onto your property, you could bring it back to them. It's not fair that an individual homeowner should have to buy a bag tag and fill it full of construction trash that blows around. Wonder if you might be able to comment on that, Jay.
Yes, I appreciate that because it's something we have struggled with and continue to field calls on, and we do have the means to be able to regulate that. The subdivision agreement deals specifically on proper maintenance and construction activities. We were just recently with the dry, warm weather from last week, dust was a problem. So we had to ensure the developer was following through on their requirement to make sure dust was controlled and maintained adequately. Likewise with the debris and refuse, we require the developer to go clean it up. It's just a matter of telling them they have to. Otherwise, it's not a pleasant experience. So we want them to do that as often as they need to.
Thank you, Councillor Helpman.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just the money in lieu for park, like for 249 units, the donation made is just under $130 per unit. Doesn't seem like very much money. Like that $32, like how much land would that buy?
We could
You
certainly
know, like-
ask, sorry, we could ask the supervisor of services how they arrived at that number.
Yeah, okay, but I didn't know if it was a rhetorical or not, but certainly it's arrived at based on the original draft approval, which was many years ago, and the arm's length assessment of the value of the land the day before the subdivision is done. So the act makes it clear it's very restrictive on the town's ability to acquire cash. And it's suppressed by that provision in the Planning Act.
So second question, so there's no getting around that. That's just the deal that we made, correct?
I wouldn't characterize it as a deal. It's a provision in the Planning Act that's our maximum amount of cash. And we've chosen to do the cash approach in this case because we realize there's parkland adjacent to this. There's parkland 800 meters to the north at Summerside. And we were trying to get a very good high density development proximity to the highway, commercial and all other amenities, which means we had to make sort of a judgment, but we put it in front of you now.
Okay, so the land that we have is a really valuable resource, and I feel like it's all end up gonna get like be promised twice, or like, I mean, for every acre we have, we could use that acre twice. And I would just say that going forward, I would not be very amenable to taking cash in lieu. Thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly a debate that we have lots around here, and sometimes, very often, that's where we end up. But sometimes there's some compromises made to achieve other goals, and I think that would be what we did in this case. Who did I have next? I had Councillor Grace. Did you have something? Oh, I saw you. Councillor Davinsky.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a clarification. The Beaner Park area is right next to this proposed development. And as the Vice Deputy Mayor said, once Lamont Sports Park gets up and running, those diamonds will be taken out. And I don't know if the lights will be taken out, but the diamonds will. So then, I guess through you to Jay, the status of the park is we own it and we control its destiny. Is that what we're saying?
I think I might just take a step back, Councillor Davinsky. I think council has made no decisions about changing the status of that park at all. So at the moment, it's a baseball park. And that's what it is. And that's the level of service that's provided. So I think it isn't correct at the moment to say that the diamonds will be removed. That's a possible outcome, but council has not made any decision to that effect. So at this point, I make this point because I don't want folks to hear diamonds, like it's sort of been said a couple of times here, that the diamonds are coming out, because we have not made that decision yet. Council will get a crack at that, but we haven't done it yet.
Thank you.
Any further comments? I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that the Accessibility Advisory Committee hasn't made the comments. You want to hear their comments before the municipality approves the development. But I'm just a little concerned with like a little clarification, because there's also 249 apartment units here that we want to get built. I don't want process holding it up. Like, can we get those comments from the Accessibility Advisory Committee quickly and in a way that doesn't hold up important development that we're trying to do? Because that's an item that, we want those comments, but we don't want to have to, we don't want to be what's standing in the way either.
So I can answer that as a reminder that the pre-servicing agreement does allow conditional permit foundation to be taken out so the developer can keep moving. And the Accessibility Advisory Committee's comments is really related to site planning works, which will happen a much later date during construction. So I think there's, although we want to not wait, of course, and keep process moving, there's still an opportunity to make sure they're not forced or rushed.
Good, so there's no risk there. Thanks for clarifying that. And I also wanted to make the comment, I'm very pleased that we did get Waterloo Street put back in this development. I think it was originally proposed without the extension of Waterloo Street. And so I think it's a positive thing, although we have no plans of opening it at the moment. I think it's great that we have it there and it will be available to future councils, future iterations of the town to open that street if they deem fit. So I think that's a really positive thing, but it's a great development and I'm looking forward to having those 249 apartments under construction. So if there's nothing further, you've heard the recommendation. I'll ask all in favor. That is carried. Okay, so, and now on this next item, and I did not declare it, but I will declare it now. I have a pecuniary interest to declare on the Miramichi, item 7.2.2, Miramichi Shores Phase 4, as I'm a shareholder in a business that owns land immediately adjacent to subject properties. So I'll turn the chair over to the deputy mayor at this point.
Thank you. This is 7.2.2 on the agenda and have a staff report. But a subdivision agreement with Miramichi Shores Phase 4. And the recommendation is that council pass a bylaw to authorize the subdivision agreement with Miramichi Shores Land Development Limited for the Miramichi Shores subdivision. And I'll ask the supervisor of development services to make the report.
Yes, thank you. This is also sort of a staged construction. The last year we entered into a pre-servicing agreement with the developers so they could get on with some pre-servicing of the site. We're at the stage of the subdivision agreement, and the special conditions I've included here just to highlight as the transfer of trail blocks and entering into trail agreements on the lands to ensure the park requirements are addressed through the trail connectivity. Provision of 5 additional residential units on the development, and installation of fencing along the eastern edge of block 17, which was a condition of approval. It's more of a reminder just of that requirement. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments? Councilor Grace?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the 5 additional residential units, I'm assuming that the builder or there will be individual builders chosen by the property owners. How do we ensure that those 5 additional residential units are contained in this subdivision?
A couple comments, if I may. This has sort of been a learning experience as we've been implementing this requirement without policy, must add, but we were learning through our past decisions how to implement it. Originally, we had just written the condition as is, and how do we ensure that when they get to assumption, that they actually have followed through. Well, this time there's 2 extenuating circumstances. One is a practice that we have started with builders to sort of educate and advise on how to integrate additional residential units upfront at the time of construction. And so when home purchasers are ready to build, they aren't sort of trying to shoehorn it in after the fact. And the second is that we've included a clause that they could provide cash in lieu of those additional residential units. So if at the end of the assumption period, we find that they haven't built 4, we can still say acquire an additional cash lump sum that we would put into the reserve, but it would be sort of I guess it's almost like as a penalty basis because they didn't follow through on the construction.
So that penalty would be imposed upon the developer as opposed to the individual builders?
Well, the agreement's with the developers, so we'd have to, we rely on them to transfer and implement the agreement to home buyers. So they do that by registering on title, but also when they're making sales, they're committing to meeting the requirements of this. And then certainly builders have to follow through, but certainly the agreement is with the developer.
Vice Deputy Mayor Myatt.
Just to clarify then, through the chair to Jay, so Jay, these additional rental, use additional rental units. In effect, with the 5% penalty, we could end up with 0 units. Is that what you're saying?
It's possible. I certainly don't see it as a likely outcome, but that's why we built the clause the way we did. And the idea is because of this location, it's not necessarily ideal for ARUs on the perception that they maybe become short-term rentals and not achieving the housing objectives. So when we provided the clause, we felt that it was a reasonable clause to be included.
What's the penalty? 5% of what?
It's not a 5%.
What's the penalty again?
We haven't got an amount that's satisfied. We'd have to come to terms with that before the assumption of the agreement or assumption of the subdivision.
That's not been determined.
The numerical amount has not been determined and the developer has not objected to that.
Councillor Hoppy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a quick comment on this about in lieu, the block 18 and block 17. That's way better than $129 per unit. Just a comment. Thank you very much.
Anyone else like to speak? Questions? Councilman.
I agree too. Sorry, for you, Madam Chair. I agree that additional residential units only need to be roughed in order for them to comply. So all they gotta do is rough in a toilet and a sink and call it a granny suite rough in, and they've made compliance anyway, which most of the type of houses that are gonna be built here, they're gonna want to put some facilities in the back end, whether it ends up being a rental apartment or a granny suite or an Airbnb unit. It's just got to be roughed in to meet compliance anyway.
Any other comments? Seeing none, then we have recommendation that council pass a bylaw to authorize the subdivision agreement with Miramichi Shores Land Development Limited for the Miramichi Shores subdivision. All in favor? Any opposed? Carries.
All right, so then that brings to the end of the planning committee meeting. So I have a resolution of this planning committee meeting of April 17th, 2023 hereby adjourns at 10:08 PM. Mover and seconder, moved by Helpman, second